establishing a 300 million US dollar fund named MUFG Ganesha Fund to invest exclusively in seeding Indian startups.
Testing, testing. Do you hear me? Good? Okay.
establishing a 300 million US dollar fund named MUFG Ganesha Fund to invest exclusively in seeding Indian startups.
Good evening, everybody. I'm going to request you to please take your seats because we are going to begin in just a couple of minutes. People outside in the hall are now requested to come in because we will close the doors. It's just the right kind of silence before the start. So I'm really requesting everyone to come in. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Neha Kumar, and I head the South Asia program of Climate Bonds Initiative. What a pleasure it is to meet exactly after a year. We met in this room, not in this room, in Mumbai last year. We had a fantastic discussion at that time, and it is so lovely that on a Friday evening, this house is full. I welcome you all on behalf of Climate Bonds Initiative and MUFG's 4th edition of what has now become our flagship annual event, where we get issuers, investors, industry leaders, financiers, experts, regulators, and policymakers to check the market pulse of how opportunities are shaping up amidst the wave of what I call imminent green transition. And today's theme, as you see, is accelerating ambition and finance, India's journey to net zero. I think these words encapsulate where we stand in the world today in terms of the inflection points that are facing us. For those of you who do not yet know us, I will just like to take a couple of minutes to introduce Climate Bonds Initiative. We are a global organization focused on moving capital at scale to climate solutions. We work very closely in developed and developing economies with market participants, with financiers, with issuers, with governments, central banks across the globe. And our mission is to create a large, credible, sustainable finance market, to create the demand for sustainable finance to get mainstream, and to finally also get right policy signals into the ecosystem, because what we are facing right now is a fundamental restructuring of our economic systems. I would also like to introduce briefly our wonderful partner, MUFG, which is committed to tackling climate change and has also committed itself by really becoming member of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, and is the only Japanese bank participating in all 5 Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero work streams, promoting discussions on various net zero initiatives in GFANZ. MUFG is the only foreign bank in India invited by the gift city regulator IFSCA that has recently constituted an expert committee on transition finance to provide recommendations for IFSCA to develop transition finance ecosystem and instruments at GIFT IFSC. While I say that, I will also just like to add that Climate Bonds Initiative also is a member of that transition finance committee, expert committee. So here, they are these two organizations trying to contribute to ecosystem development, which leads to credible investments and more pipelines and more investments coming on the ground. We welcome you today, and my job is to stand the least between you and what will follow, gripping stories of how the developments are shaping up. I will just briefly tell you about how we will structure our evening today. You will have a short setting of the scene by Sean Kidney, the CEO of Climate Bonds Initiative, just after I finish. And then we will welcome Mr. Anant Narayan, member SEBI, to also give us his opening remarks. We will then get into two sessions. One focused on industry leaders, issuers who are borrowing capital, raising capital, and look and understand what their challenges and opportunities are. And then we will get into an investors panel. People will join online as well. It's a hybrid event. And then after that, we will get onto a fireside chat, which Sean will moderate with Robbie Singh of Adani Green. Just a little bit of a housekeeping announcement from my side. It is a hybrid event. People who are joining us online, I would request them to keep themselves on mute and only speak when they get on their turn to speak. Also, this event is getting live streamed and will also be available post the session today. Without much ado, I will now welcome Sean Kidney to set the scene for the conversation this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Neha. A few words to get us going. You know what the problem is? Climate change. That's what we're essentially working on, mobilising capital for climate action. At a dinner, I was in London a few weeks ago at a dinner where, last week in fact, where a couple of very senior climate scientists were present. And they started off telling a story of the extent to which records have been broken over the past 12 months. We've hit 1.5 degrees. In fact, briefly, we hit 2 degrees warming. We've hit the highest greenhouse gas measures in the atmosphere ever, while humans have been on the planet. We've hit abnormalities in the Arctic Ocean, which the scientists say guarantees things like the West Antarctic ice shelf are now gone, absolutely certain to melt. Greenland is gone, absolutely certain to melt. The only question is how we adapt to these things. The story was very grim. In fact, they said that we are tracking globally at a level of climate change which is more extreme than the worst of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change projections. The news is quite bad. To have a reasonable chance of avoiding utterly catastrophic climate change, that's the sort of climate change where India becomes uninhabitable, we have to drop emissions very quickly, globally, on average. 55% by 2030, 6 short years. We have to also prepare for the climate change that is now baked into our system. The greenhouse gases we've seen in the last 30 years will take another 30 years to wash through the global climate system, which means that even if we shut down of all NTPC's coal plants tomorrow morning, we would still have increasing impacts of climate change till 2050 or so. That means hotter summers, everyone. Make sure that air conditioning's installed. we will see very significant volatility in the global food, economic, social, and health systems. That is certain, that can no longer be avoided now. We have to prepare. I say this because our job today is not just to consider things like clean energy or industrial transition, it's also to contemplate the wholesale rethinking of our societies to ensure that our people can survive, to ensure that we can not only prosper, but that we can prosper through frequent, severe volatility that will now be the norm. That's the bad news. But at this speech, at this dinner, I got up and made a speech which said that for all of that, and it's very important to acknowledge what it is that we're dealing with, for all of that, I'm curiously hopeful. In fact, I'm incredibly hopeful. Because some things have started happening. The global supertanker of an economy that we have has definitely started turning. The International Energy Agency says that in 2022, the year before last, 90% of all electricity generation investment on the planet was renewable, clean. 90%, not 40%, not 25%. And of course, India has been a huge part of that. Electric vehicle sales went up a third last year. In China, they this year expected to hit some 40% of all cars sold. Whoa, that is the end, at the end of the tunnel for the oil industry, which depends on Chinese demand above all to maintain prices, putting aside volatility because of wars. There is a boom globally in electric rail investment, with India being a huge part of that boom at the moment. I'm so excited to finally see in the near future the opening up of new rail lines in Mumbai, of fast rail to Ahmedabad, and so on. India, I think, will catch up relatively quickly with the extraordinary high-speed rail and rail network that exists in China that frankly makes Europe look 20th century in terms of its infrastructure, or in Japan, where one of my great joys is getting in a Shinkansen to go to a ski resort or go to Osaka. It's just so smooth, and it shows you what the future will be here. This is happening right now, this boom. In industrials, we'll hear from my friend from JSW a little later, but we see this extraordinary embracement by steel, by cement, by chemicals, by the fertilizer industry, which uses gas, which is now looking at shifting to ammonia from green hydrogen. Embracement of transition. And this is the theme that underpins everything today, this embrace of the need to transition and this starting to plan, finally I'm going to say, but joyously now, what the world's going to look like for our companies, our industries, our states, our governments. Last week, Japan issued the first tranche of its climate transition bond, a sovereign bond, certified by Bonds Initiative, by the way, supported by MUFG, to finance its green transformation plan, which is a plan, by the way, that involves mobilising 150 trillion yen. God, those trillion figures excite me. It's on a par per capita with the IRA in the US, which is also an extraordinary plan. 80% devoted to clean energy, which is delivering project after project after project that's breaking ground across the US, largely, by the way, in red states, Republican states, where most of the jobs have been created, would suggest that it's going to lock in that even if there is a change of government. And in Europe, multiple initiatives. People say, what about the war? It's made everything wrong. On the contrary, the war in Ukraine has turbocharged the transition in Europe. And Europe will beat its 2030 targets handsomely, as will China, by the way, in many areas. This is extraordinary. And of course, Indian policy has been driving change as well. And in the capital sector, we see, well, engagement just in our tiny little corner here that Gaurav and I work on bonds and green bonds. We've seen in the last 10 years, a 100-fold increase in thematic bond issuance. We're now sitting at a $4 trillion market, and it will keep growing through sovereigns, through other industries and so on. We haven't even started, really. At an event in Dubai recently, I was asked, how big is this going to get? I put my head out and I said, 40 trillion. Global bond markets are around 130 trillion. I absolutely think that we will, by converting the debt issuance programs of JSW, the debt issuance programs of Avada, the debt issuance programs of Tata Steel into green bonds and transition bonds, quickly head towards the 40 trillion figure. We're having conversations in Japan, in Italy, in the US about how to recognise the transition plans of these companies in the context of our 1.5 degree and bring them to the market to show this is what we need to invest in. It's how we shift our societies and become greener. It's not just investing in green, although for you renewable energy developers, we need to also improve investment in the super green stuff. That's underway now. Amongst global investors, I no longer get anyone doubting what the future is. They say that in the light of the commitments made by all major countries in the last 2 years, it is very clear the future has been decided. It will be green. The only question now is the speed of the transition and who's going to be a winner and loser. But of course, the speed is everything. In climate circles, from a climate science point of view, getting those global emissions down very fast is critical to whether we even have a future that we can leave for our children. We do need to see next a few things happen. We need greater clarity on what qualifies, transition criteria, entities criteria. Is the JSW plan good enough? I don't know. We'll hear from Paboda later, but you know, those kinds of assessment issues are critical now. And with our colleagues at GFANZ and various other organisations, we are publishing UNEP-FI and PRI, we are now bringing guidance to the market. And we need guidance on resilience. What do we need to do with our ports? Well, I'm going to tell you, we need to raise the wharves, but there's much more than that, because we're going to see significant outages. Mumbai is becoming a cyclone zone, for example. What does that mean for our infrastructure? How do we protect, etc.? We need guidance on this. Second, we do need more incentives. We need our development finance institutions to do much more in risk mitigation. Luckily, they're stepping up. I'm so excited by NABFID, new bank here. I'm excited by NABARD. I'm excited by what the ADB is starting to do now, what JBIC in Japan is starting to do now to support green. Hey, they've got to do a lot more. I want them to be deeply invested in this transition in a way that they're getting to. But the European Investment Bank, one of the largest lenders in the world, now calls itself a climate bank. 50% of all lending is mitigation, and the other 50% has to be consistent with climate resilience. That's what every development bank will get to in the next few years. We need enabling state action. I have to keep talking about JSW because he's right in front of me and he's a friend. There's no way that JSW can deliver the ambitions of this man without the enabling state action. And that applies to JFE and Nippon Steel in Japan. That applies to ArcelorMittal as well. What that means, what kind of action, that's the job that we have to sort out now. Aggregation of demand will be cheaper than subsidy. We won't get the subsidy. We've got to be clever here, but unless we work together, we do not make this change. I believe we can work together on the kind of changes, bringing together the changes that'll make a difference. And then lastly, we need to mobilise domestic capital. This isn't just about international capital. Tonight, you'll hear from international capital, but remember that this is a global story. We have the Life Insurance Corporation of India, keen and interested. We will get more. My last word, for all of us in this room who have the privilege to act in this area, we need to make it easy to act. For you bankers at MUFG, and a couple of other bankers in the room, like Barclays in the room, Our job is to make it easy to act for our corporate clients and our municipal clients, which is not just about easy lending, it's also about supporting them to get government making and enabling measures to make it easy to act. Keep that in your mind. If we don't make it easy to act, we will not meet our climate targets and we will not create a future for our children. But I believe we can, I believe we will. Thanks to you and our speakers today, I believe things are going well. I am full of hope. Can I welcome Gaurav on stage and Anant to give a keynote while Gaurav and I sit on the edge here contemplating what SEBI is going to say.
Thank you, Sean, for that energizing speech. As I welcome Mr. Anant Narayan, I will just like to give his brief introduction before he starts his address, but also to acknowledge that the definitive, progressive, and engaging action that the regulators of India are taking. SEBI is one of them and has been pretty much ahead of the curve in terms of defining a guidance regime which brings various actors on board and gives them also some flexibility in terms of preparing themselves, but sets the guidance, sets the direction of travel pretty clearly. Mr. Anant Narayan, he's a whole-time member of Security and Exchange Board of India and looks after Market Intermediaries Regulation and Supervision Department, Alternative Investment Fund and Foreign Portfolio Investors Department, Integrated Surveillance Department, Department of Economic and Policy Analysis, and Information Technology Department. Mr. Anant Narayan has more than 2.5 decades of experience in banking and financial markets and has held various senior positions. Prior to this, he also held the position of Associate Professor, SP Jain Institute of Management and Research, Mumbai. Mr. Narayan has also served as a director on the boards of various banks and corporates. He has also been a member of various advisory committees constituted by SEBI and RBI. So without much ado, I welcome you, sir, to give the opening address. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I'd like to start off by complimenting Climate Bonds Initiative and MUFG for putting this event together. It's very, very timely. The whole point about India's transition to zero cannot be argued with. It's a clear objective that we all share. All ideas that come out in this conference, I'll be certainly very, very keen to hear about them and what we could do to facilitate this whole process of India's transition to zero. So what I thought I'll do is use this opportunity to give you a little bit of a regulatory perspective on maybe 2 or 3 areas. To start with the whole process of capital formation in India and the trends that we are seeing there in recent times. And then I thought I'll move to the actual subject at hand today in terms of SEBI's own views around climate finance and green bonds and so on and so forth. And finally, again, a reiteration of what I expect from this particular conference. It's certainly very, very exciting times for India at this point in time. You know, this is that time of the year when we get a lot of visitors from overseas coming and visiting us. They visit us in Mumbai, in Delhi, and sort of ask us our views and tell us about what they think about the world and about India. Oftentimes, in today's climate, we find that the visitors who come to us are extremely ebullient, very bullish about India. Sometimes we are the ones who are acting as a wet blanket at telling people to calm down a little bit. But that's okay. That's the nature of the times right now. Clearly, the stars seem to be aligned. And frankly, SEBI's role in this regard is, you know, it's not just to be a market regulator who's trying to catch people who are doing the wrong things. If you look at our SEBI Act, our preamble talks about 3 pillars. It's investor protection, market development, and market regulation. Put the 3 together, it's capital formation. It's to aid capital formation. So our job is to ensure that capital is being formed. It's not just to catch the wrong guys. In fact, the easiest thing we could do to catch the wrong guys is stop all businesses, but then we have failed completely because then no capital formation happens. Now, recent trends in capital formation have been absolutely amazing as well. It kind of mirrors what we've seen as the mood of investors coming and visiting us. So for instance, the number of mutual fund investors in India have grown from about 22 million as of March 2020, before COVID, to about 46, 47 million now. The number of unique investors who actually have depository accounts through which they trade in securities has gone up from something like 42 million to about 97 million now. Likewise, if you look at the assets under management of mutual funds coming from individuals, both retail as well as high net worth individuals, it used to be about 12 trillion rupees as of March 2020. Today, it's upwards of 32 trillion rupees. There's no doubt that formalization of the economy and digitization and our excellent payments and settlements ecosystem, all of that has helped a lot of Indians move from being savers to being investors. So there's an increased number of, to Sean's earlier point, on domestic capital formation. That's an extremely exciting area as well, where we are seeing people seeking out risk in a way that's also scary for us as a regulator. We sometimes want them to take it easy. But the reality is people are very, very keen to become investors and contribute in this capital formation process and prosper in the whole midst. Now, while we celebrate these successes, there's no doubt that we have a long, long way to go. So while I talked about 46 million mutual fund subscribers and 96 million equity holders or demat account holders, you actually have 510 million Indians having banking accounts, right? And the number of 32 trillion rupees in mutual funds pales when you look at 200 trillion rupees of fixed deposits and current accounts and fixed deposits in the banking system. We have a long way to go. And that's an exciting area for us, both exciting as well as challenging in terms of investor education, making sure that there is investments happening responsibly and all of that. There's also a huge area of opportunity in terms of the type of instruments that investors look for. At the moment, it's a very equity-oriented search for products, right? We are seeing a lot of money flowing into equity markets, particularly into mid-cap, small-cap, micro-cap kind of stocks. Sometimes it's a bit scary. There is so much more that this capital can be challenged into. Debt markets, for instance, our good old corporate bond markets, InvITs, REITs, green financing, all of these. And here is where we need market participants such as yourselves to kind of ensure that this pie grows a lot more in terms of the number of products as well and in terms of the number of choices. And education comes along so that people know where to put their money into. Now, so much for capital formation and recent trends on that. As far as green finance and as far as climate is concerned, I have to start with the caveat. I'm not the whole-time member who looks at the Green Bond Initiative. That's my colleague, Mr. Ashwini Bhatia, who's not here. But having said that, there is no doubt that all of us on the board of Securities Exchange Board of India, each member is absolutely dedicated towards this particular, ensuring that capital formation goes towards India's transition to net zero as well. So while I'm not an expert, I'm still happy to speak about it. I'll tell you about SEBI's approach towards climate finance and green finance. We've tried to approach this in three different directions. First is around disclosures. Now, what do we mean by that? We have the BRSR, which is already in operation right now. That's the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting. That's since the last fiscal year. That's applicable to 1,000 companies, and you have that reporting which is going through at this point in time. We've also moved to what we call the BRSR Core, which at the moment covers 150 companies, where beyond just reporting on a few limited parameters, there's also limited assurance that needs to be done. So we're doing this in stages. We're going to expand this to cover the supply chains as well. From the next fiscal year onwards, around 250 companies will have to expand this BRSR Core to the supply chain as well. And this BRSR Core will be extended to all 1,000 companies by around fiscal year 2027. So that's the plan, that we want to get into a space where this reporting becomes a matter of a routine. There's a lot of debate about how our standards stack up with other global standards and all of that. Just one thing to keep in mind, we have to ensure that we look after our own interests as well, without compromising on all that Sean said about, understanding the criticality of what this means for the world and what this means for India's own development. So that's one part on the disclosures. We've also had a lot of progress made in terms of green bonds and how do you get the assurances around that stacked up. Admittedly, we've not done a great job in furthering the cause of green bonds in India. It's less than $1 billion, which is a bit of a shame. There's a lot more of green bonds that have been issued overseas, and there's something for us to pick up there. And I'm hoping some pointers will come out from this conference on what we could do to sort of grow this pie a lot more. There's also an interesting trend that we are seeing. We talk about greenwashing a lot, and the fact that regulators are finding ways to sort of stop this practice. We also notice another interesting thing happening, which is green hushing, which is a lot of people who actually adhere to green principles, but are afraid to claim they're doing so for fear that they have to then go through the assurance and be subject to a lot of regulatory oversight and so on and so forth. So again, there is some balance that's required, that in our eagerness to ensure greenwashing is not happening, we push everybody to doing green hushing. And that's something which we need to find a balance around. Of course, we think green hushing will go away once these EU exports and all of that kick in, and people will have to come out and do the right thing. But again, this is a transition stage at that level. So disclosure is a big part of what we are pushing for. The second thing, which is kind of, we are pioneers in as far as green is concerned. We now had ESG rating providers put up in India. And this is kind of unique. We've not seen any other jurisdictions do this. Now, in fact, the UK has come out and is trying to do the same in terms of having ESG rating providers. This is a very conscious call that we've taken. We want this industry to develop and develop with an Indian outlook. Of course, that doesn't stop them from doing what international standards require, but we want this particular industry to be strong in terms of ensuring assurance, in terms of ensuring there's no greenwashing and all of that. So that's something that we're looking at very, very closely. The final part, as far as green is concerned, is on the investment angle. We now have mutual funds which offer green funds. They are required to have at least 65% of their investments into green causes, of course, which means they have to invest in companies which are part of BRSR core, which have assurances in place and so on and so forth. Again, admittedly, the amounts involved right now are still very, very small, but this is a start and we intend to go further. If I was to summarize, this was of course a very narrow SEBI perspective, but if I was to summarize how India as a whole, between the government, the RBI, all regulators put together, how we're looking at it, I think there's a fair amount of understanding that this is crucial, that this is non-negotiable, this has to be done, right? There is no way out. We absolutely have to transition to net zero. So there is a commitment from India that you're well aware of that by 2030, we'll have 50% of our power capacity in the form of sustainable sources. We've committed to a 2070 net zero transition. Some people might want us to be a lot more ambitious, but the reality, even this was not required from us, and we've made that commitment. I think the intent is to try and see if we can actually accelerate it, but at least the intent has been put down on a piece of paper, and we're working towards it. I have no doubt we'll meet this 50% sustainable sources of energy by 2030. So at a policy level, there's a lot of understanding. As far as regulators are concerned, we are still struggling with a few things, including simple things like trying to figure out what is the exact amount of financing which is required by year in order to ensure that India's transition to net zero happens. And the numbers that we get are so widely variant depending upon what that person has had for breakfast. There's a World Bank number which says $150 billion per year. There are others who put the number as twice of that. So we do understand that there is a huge gap between what is required and what's happening right now, but it would really help to be able to box that in some rational manner so we can act upon it in a rational manner. So if I had to summarize, as far as India is concerned, I think the ecosystem, everybody in this room, the government, the regulators, all of us are committed to this. We are still admittedly feeling our way around a few things, which is where we need a lot of dialogue with the industry to happen. We are doing our things in terms of disclosures, in terms of ESG rating providers, in terms of investment opportunities and where capital formation can happen. While I talked a lot about domestic capital formation, not for a minute am I suggesting that we don't require external savings to come into the country. We absolutely require that as well. We are a growing country and capital formation requires money to come in from everywhere. From this particular conference, and then once again, thank you to Climate Bonds Initiative and MUFG for organizing this. I would really appreciate it if you could share some of your takeaways and tell us what is it that you would like us to do so that this cause is furthered further. SEBI likes to think of itself as a very consultative regulator. We might not know all the answers, but we have very, very good colleagues and stakeholders who to help us with expertise. There are actual advisory committees and fora where suggestions are absolutely welcome and taken on board. My email address, my chairperson's email address, all my fellow members' email address are available on the website. If you have concrete suggestions, please pass them on to us. I can assure you it will be looked at very, very intently because this is an area that we can't afford to miss. Once again, thank you very much for having me here. All the best for this conference and Godspeed in India's transition to net zero. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Gaurav, I think we need our panel on stage. Yes. Can we ask the panelists to join us on stage? I'm going to introduce Tomo first, and I'll leave you to introduce our Indian colleagues. Sure. So we've got this unusual guy joining us today, this guy called Tomo Ishikawa, who's interesting for a couple of reasons. He's MUFG's Chief Regulatory Engagement Officer, whatever that means. I guess that means talking to SEBI. And he's also, though, Head of Corporate Planning, and also MUFG's representative on GFANS, the Glasgow Finance Initiative for Climate Change, and the new Net Zero Bankers Alliance, and I could go on. When I said to Tomo in Tokyo, we're doing this event with your colleagues in India, he said to me, I want to be there. And he's turned up. So this is a symbol of the extent, a signal to the extent to which MUFG head office is deeply engaged in this program, is supporting the local office, and I'm going to say, for the benefit of anyone looking for finance, really keen to support Indian industries in transition. Tomo, please.
Thank you very much.
Gaurav.
Can I request Mr. Rajat Gupta, CFO of Avada Group, to come on stage? Avada is an established player in the renewable energy space, as it is a pioneer in the production of green hydrogen and green ammonia. Welcome, Rajat. Can we have Mr. Pramod Acharya, Chief Sustainability Officer of JSW Group, who needs no introduction.
My good friend. Honestly, he's a friend, even though I was saying a few words about it.
And can we have Mr. Sully, Deputy Managing Director and Chief Sustainability Officer of State India, India's national banking champion. Welcome, sir.
Kick us off, Gaurav.
Sure. I think I'll start with Mr. Sully. As India's national banking champion, what are your views in terms of what financial institutions like SBI can do in terms of the theme, India's transition to net zero, and SBI's own plans on the same?
I hope I'm audible.
We can hear you. It's good. The State Bank of India is being heard.
I see. Even if you whisper, I suppose the... By the way, I was just introduced as CSO, right?
Yeah.
Chief Sustainability Officer. It's a term that I'm trying to get used to. Because I'm the Chief Credit Officer of State Bank of India. And the bank thought that the person best to ensure transition is the Chief Credit Officer. Because all the large credit, the JSW proposals come to the credit committee. I chair the credit committee of the bank. And I can ask for the transition plans. They put me as, I mean, it's a few weeks old. So I'm just still getting used to it. And as regarding State Bank of India, and I think most of you would have known that we We have announced that on the Scope 1 and Scope 2, State Bank of India would be net zero by 2030. And we have started the journey and we are on it.
Did you say 2030? Yeah.
2030, 2030.
Hey, give him a clap. That's what we need.
But did you hear what I said prior to that? I said Scope 1 and 2. Right. So I think substantial work has already been done. In fact, if you look at the kind of work that we have done in sort of greening our own institutions' emissions, we have something like 992 buildings. We have completely greened 37 of it. You won't believe it, State Bank of India, being a financial institution, is producing today 38 megawatt of green electricity. 38 megawatts. 15 of it from wind. We actually own 10 wind turbines, producing 15 megawatts. We have today over solar installations in something like 690 of our buildings, generating about 17 megawatts. We have about 65,000 ATMs, and out of that, 3,500 are solarized. We have about 7 megawatts actually driving that ATMs. So substantially, work is being done, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. In the sense, huge amount of work needs to be done to take that forward. In fact, a few months back, after the announcement came that the country is looking to be net zero by 2070, and bank deliberated on it and decided that we need to align with the country's goals, and decided that on the Scope 3, our finance emissions, we are looking to be net zero by 2055. 2055 is the mandate that we have given ourselves. And 2055 came out of the fact that it is also the 100th year of our existence as State Bank of India. State Bank of India is a 217-year-old institution. You may not realize it. We sort of started our journey in 1806. And this was sort of, became State Bank of India in 1955 through an act of parliament. So 100th year, we thought it's appropriate that we would be net zero. That is a full 15 years before the country itself has. And it's not just about giving a sort of a visionary mandate to ourselves. We have also put in place the first milestone in line with what the country has done. 2030, I think, as Mr. Anand Narayan just mentioned, 50% of our energy has to come from sustainable sources. So 2030 is one milestone that we have also set for ourselves. And that milestone, what we have said is 7.5% of our portfolio, as it stands on that day, would be green, completely green. And it's a very ambitious target. Let me tell you, today, just about 1.38% of our portfolio is green. So this 1.38% portfolio, we have to take it up to 7.5%, is a very ambitious target. I know, somebody, a banker looking from Europe may find it, why is it so low? Because when I talk to my peers there, they are looking at 25%, 30%. In fact, I was in Dubai the other day, some of the banks were saying we are already at 5.5%, etc. But we are still a growing country. So that's the interim target that we have set for ourselves. We have also said that 25% of this would also come from sources outside the country. We have not really seriously looked at the green bonds, but we are seriously looking at accessing multilateral agencies, the DFIs, etc., for funding. So that with the assurance that, the funding that they give us, we're looking for concessionary funding. The concessions in those funding will be passed on to create a new market here. So that's something that assurance we are given, and we are sort of succeeding. We have already a little over $2 billion here. In fact, in the last 2-3 months itself, we have raised a little under $500 billion. So that process is on. And if you look at it, the government has just announced 1 crore, I know, Surya Ghar, I think you would have heard of it, right? 1 crore Surya Ghar by 2026. And State Bank of India has been made the nodal bank for implementing the scheme. And we have just signed a deal with World Bank to source a substantial amount of money at an acceptable rate so that we can fund it. So we are looking at all kinds of sources internally and externally to drive our green sort of mandate that we have set for ourselves.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll come to you, Mr. Acharya, but I want to ask Rajat a question first. As for the top 3 RE utility scale developers in India, what are your plans in terms of the next 5 years? And how do you see this RE space develop?
So, Gaurav, basically, the way we look at, I'm saying our journey started about 10 years back, 12 years back as Welspun Energy, and probably we were one of the first amongst the platforms to reach our gigawatt scale. And when, it was sold off to Tata Power in 2016, and then started again from scratch. So today we are about 11 gigawatts in terms of portfolio, comprising about close to 4.5 gigawatts in terms of operational capacity, and another 6.5 to 7 gigawatts in terms of the projects which we have won in various auctions during the current financial year. We definitely see ourselves as one of the leading partners for the government's green initiatives, and the way we look at it is not just decarbonization, but as part of the achieving energy sustainability, from a country's perspective. In terms of our plan is that we want to achieve 11 gigawatt of operational portfolio in the next 2.5 years time, and probably target is somewhere between closer to about 30 gigawatts by 2030. That's the portfolio we're working on. And that's where we are in terms of portfolio. And what we are trying to do is also, I'm saying, today we are a only solar platform. In the last 1 year, we tried to work on, moving away from pure solar to, say a hybrid, for example, where recently in auctions we have won closer to about 1 gigawatt of hybrid projects. Okay. What we are also doing is we want to become a more diversified and integrated energy player, and therefore we want to take ourselves calling as SAN2, molecule company. So we are doing both a backward and forward integration. In terms of backward integration, now we are setting up our own module manufacturing projects. All right. So this year our plan is to do, what we are doing is we are doing about 4 gigawatts of module manufacturing projects, out of which a gigawatt will become operational this year itself, and a 3 gigawatt of integrated ingot to module project, which is scheduled to become operational by end of next calendar year. That's what we are working on. And then forward integration in terms of green hydrogen and ammonia, as well as green methanol. That's what we are working on. I would also say, as a developer, these targets are very ambitious, right? And we believe in terms of model manufacturing and in terms of the RE projects, we see definitely a clear pathway forward in achieving our targets, right? But of course, green hydrogen is something which is still in the development stage, and considering it's quite complex in terms of not only technology, in terms of, whether financing, demand creation, in terms of creating infrastructure, we believe that it could still be another 3 to 4 years away in terms of, reaching certain scales and levels on the green hydrogen and ammonia side. So there's a lot of work to be done on that side. And as Mr. Sali said, in terms of SBI support, going for green and supporting green, I think there's a lot of work we believe where the financiers and lenders can, do further, okay, to support the not just renewable energy projects, but the entire energy transition portfolio, and where the cost of capital for financing green projects, I think, is the biggest, I believe, a sort of a roadblocker. I'm saying today, what any renewable energy player or energy transition player borrows at, it is what is any other, developer or a project person borrows at. So there's no differentiation in terms of pricing or benefits. I'm saying while everybody talks about sustainability, decarbonization, everyone wants to talk about that, how do we promote green energy or renewable energy? But when it comes to, pricing of the renewable energy projects, there's no differentiation, for example, right? Okay. Also, I'm saying renewable energy is something which we feel is still clubbed as part of the power sector, right? Last 10 years, we as developers have been representing to RBI, everybody else, that can it be taken out of the power sector exposure norms and, can it be done differently? Okay. So those are things which we believe are areas which can be addressed, and therefore it can help further, push forward the green energy and initiatives, etc., from our side.
Well, thank you for that. Mr. Acharya.
Hang on.
Yeah.
Rajat, you're a CFO, which means he's got to be dry. He's got to be careful for finance. But your actual corporate plans are like extraordinary. Subject to getting the capital, which is why I was looking at SBI, of course, subject to getting the capital at a full rate. How big can this get? You've got a lot of ambition, but I want to get a sense of just what the size of the opportunity is from your perspective.
So I think, I'm saying some of the points which have already been talked about in terms of the targets which we as a country are looking at, all right? So I don't see, it's like a large canvas where, you can create as much as you want. And as far as you talk about the capital, I've been part of this sector for the last 14 years. I've been worked on earlier 2 platforms done by a private equity investor, and my own experience tells me that we have not seen a capital as a, sort of a roadblock or a, bottleneck in this sector. There's enough capital available, both from strategic investors, private investors, all right? We have not seen even the debt financing as a constraint so far, all right? We have raised close to 2 billion debt already, for our project so far. And if I look at that from a current, operational portfolio of 4.5, we are targeting something like even 11 gigawatt in the next 2.5 years. It means we'll be raising another close to about $4 billion of debt, on our balance sheet. So we don't see a challenge in terms of raising that. The question is that, and what terms and pricing do you raise it? Okay. So even if you look at the investors who come into India, private investors, etc., I'm saying everybody's looking at, high teens, for example, right? In terms of dollar returns, for example, right? Ultimately, these projects are more like annuity projects. Can you really target high teens, all right, from these projects? That's one thing, for example, right? Okay. The other thing is the markets. I'm saying so far, it's the Indian lenders, multilats, etc., are able to lend and, raise money. But still, it is the spectrum of the NBFCs and the banks and multilats. The bond market is still not there, all right? If you look at the Indian bond market, is everybody's subscribing to AA or AAA rated bonds, right? 85% of the bonds which are subscribed in India are AA plus onwards, right? Those bonds are also done on private placement. 98% of the bonds are done on the private placement basis, right? Okay. And even if you look at the investors, it's only the institutional investors who are subscribing to these bonds. Even the debt mutual fund, which Mr. Anand talked about, right? It's primarily the institutional investors or the corporates who are lending it. None of the retail investors are participating, right? Okay. How many of people sitting in this room, invest in debt mutual funds or, bonds, for example, right? Okay. Despite we are one of the countries having highest saving rates in the world, right? So what I'm trying to say is that capital is not an issue, okay? The scale and size of the opportunity is not an issue. Can it be made better? Can it be made more efficient? Answer is yes. And we believe there's a phenomenal opportunity, in terms of making it, much more efficient and effective. Does it answer your question?
I want them to quintuple their balance sheet, right? Let's be clear about this as fast as possible. But I appreciate that's the point of today's session, how we do this. And so your point's well made. It is much easier said on my part than done, I know. I'm just hoping that this guy is going to be able to deliver a real stream of really cheap capital for you to make things easier, but we'll have the conversation over a beer.
No, rather, I'm happy that, we have got Sally on this side of it, this gentleman on my right side of it, and I will use this forum, to, pursue them, to, look at the sector more differently and,
I can assure you at State Bank of India, we have never said no to a renewable energy proposal.
No, that's what I said. I'm saying there's no dearth of capital. We have enough,
Fair enough.
both debt and equity capital available. What I'm trying to say is at what terms and pricing do you raise that, right? Can it be better? Answer is yes. That's all I'm saying.
Sure. Thank you. Mr. Acharya, JSW is slightly unique in the sense that it has a strong presence across hard-to-abate sectors like steel and cement, as well as is growing strongly in the renewables and the green space also. So what's your strategy and how does it link up to your focus on transition and India's commitment to net zero?
Thank you, Gaurav, for that question, and good evening, everybody. I think I will start with where Son set the scene, that mitigation needed faster. We need to accelerate the mitigations, but I will say brace the adoption. Adaptations we need to be braced on. And that is where, being in a business, we look at opportunity in the climate change to enhance these or accelerate the ambitions. Now let me give examples that why I'm saying that. Because we fundamentally believe that any business at any time in the society, the only job is to solve a societal problem, whether through their product or through their services. Now, if we all understand, agree, and realize that the climate change is one of the biggest threat for the society, and here I tell from a business that we have a business opportunity, then we have a role to solve those societal problems. Now, you summed up to how JSW looks like. We have a combination, we are more known as a steel maker to the nation and the largest steel maker, which is hard to abate, which I essentially don't agree that term anyway. I call, it should be called as a priority to abate, not hard to abate, because we all need to do it as a prioritization so that it is done a faster way. But besides that fact, when you look at our, when we look at the opportunities, we are having all the businesses which complement and supplement each other to accelerate the ambitions. Let me give an example. In JSW Steel, we have ambitions to phase out thermal coal use by 2030. That means it requires significant amount of renewable energy for the use in round the clock. It's not what you need in the daytime which solar can provide. That's a significant ambitions. So we have estimated we need 10 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030. Look at this scale. And then we have a business, that is JSW Energy, to ensure the supply of that renewable energy to the steel. Here they complement and supplement both the opportunity as a business and also to mitigate the climate change. Let me give another example where two businesses are linked. As we grow in the steel, because we all understand that India's economy needs growth, India's economy needs steel, because that's one of the GDP multiplier, we call it, right? If economy has to grow, we have seen all the developed country, the economy grows and steel industry grows. So we all agree, understand, realized as a nation that this sector is going to grow in the production capacity and so also possibly in the emissions, but that is the dichotomy I'll come to later. But we understand this is going to grow. We are also going to grow. We have to double the capacity by 2030. That means we'll be generating a lot of slags. That's called blast furnace slags. And there we saw an opportunity. We have another business called JSW Cement, which produces a slag cement. And JSW Cement has the lowest carbon footprint per every ton of cement we produce in the world, not only in India.
Whoa.
Okay, so we have to maintain that and also grow our business, because we need to clean up the mess which will be left by the steel growth and use that as a business opportunity. Let me give you another example. We understand that the mobility sector needs complete transformation. Son, you talked about how China is going to grow electrical mobility. Here in JSW, we have created a new business opportunity which we have declared that we are foraying into the electric vehicles. That is to provide the solutions for decarbonization of the transportation sector, and that also provides a business opportunity for the group, right? So in a sense, what I want to see that when you from financing world or any stakeholder look at JSW Group, we are there to provide the solutions, at the same time find a business opportunity. That's what we look at. And there are many initiatives we are taking, and these are the couple of examples I gave. I can talk about, say, for example, we have another business called JSW Paints, possibly will not, I'm sure those from India might be aware about. We have created all the paints are environment friendly. They're water-based, right? So that's also not directly maybe helping in the climate change ambitions, but it is supporting the environmental sustainability issues as a business group.
Hey, have you ever wondered what a chief sustainability officer does? This is it, isn't it?
Okay. Okay, before I give it the question back, I give another example. You know how we are driving those symbiosis growth in the symbiosis pattern. I talked about we require 10 gigawatt of renewable energy, but we require also RTC, round the clock supply of the energy. That is where we are investing in battery storage, hydro pump storage, and that is becoming a business opportunity. At the same time, accelerating the climate ambitions and mitigations, right? So that, I mean, if you look at, we are looking at holistically to solve a societal problem for which the business exists. And that's our ambitions.
Well, it's very interesting to see the synergies between different business. And it's not obvious, and thank you for putting it out so clearly. Tomo, question for you. You heard all the other panelists. Was the existing climate financing gap in Asia, and do you see it actually getting addressed effectively by all stakeholders, and where do you see MUFG's role in all this?
Sure, that's a great question, and I'll probably need 20 minutes to address that question, but I know the clock is ticking, so I'll try to summarize what I want to say. But I think it was interesting when you mentioned about, it's not about the availability of funding, but it's about the cost. I think this is what's very unique about this challenge, and I'll talk about MUFG's challenge later, but what you see around the globe is those countries or companies that are really vulnerable and need funding, they're the ones who has to pay higher price or higher funding costs. But you know, if you're a German company or a US company, they can go out and raise money, whatever the rate is, but you know, very competitive rate. Whereas if you're Asian economies in emerging economy, Asian companies in Asian economies, you have to pay much higher costs. How do you compensate that, right? How do you make sure that the companies in these markets will be incentivized to raise money and accelerate transition? I mean, how do you do that? This is not something we alone cannot do it, and this is exactly why we need bonds, we need all the investors, we want more banks, more institutions encouraged and also excited with the opportunity in this region. Not just say, yeah, let's invest in green financing opportunity in Germany by German bank and in the US, all the IRA exciting projects by American banks. But if the money is not flowing into this region, as Sean said earlier, this is not gonna, we will not be able to address this problem. And we all know that unless we deal with a climate change issue or emission in this region, in Asia, we're all barbecued, right? No matter how much funding is provided to developed countries in Europe or US, if no money is here, what are we trying to do, right? And something I actually discussed with many policymakers, I know it's not going to happen, but if there's one government, global one government, where would you invest? Would you invest in, I mean, nothing wrong with Germany, but Germany, France, UK, Japan, or India, you know, or emerging economies here? I would think that if it's a one government, one system, one kind of clearing process to prioritize where to invest money, I think would be here, right? Who would invest in, I don't know, New York or San Francisco, when there's limited amount of capital with limited, risk appetite. So this is why I'm trying to, as Sean said earlier, I chair one of working group within Net Zero Banking Alliance. I chair Transition Finance Working Group. I'm very active in GFANS, Transition Finance discussion with Mark Carney and Michael Bloomberg. What I said is all the time is, don't just talk about financing or making the financing flow in the developed country, but always think about developing country, because what I would say is the impact will be much larger. And there is a framework to compare this impact, which is called marginal abatement analysis. If there's one government for the world, you should do that analysis and compare where do you make the most impact if it's let's say 100 million or 1 billion. I don't think that system exists, but we are trying within MUFG. That's exactly what we're trying to do. Not just think about, because we're a Japanese bank, we just invest in Japan. No, because we have extensive footprint in Asia, and we have skin in the game. So to some extent, this is opportunity, as you said, but this is not just pursuing opportunity in Asia. We have responsibility, and we have dependency. If Asia is not decarbonized, if India cannot achieve net zero, we will never achieve net zero. So I just want to maybe spend 1 minute about our history of net zero. So we committed to net zero 3 years ago by becoming a member of Net Zero Banking Alliance. This was almost 3 years ago. When I joined this discussion, everyone was talking about, divestment. No financing to coal, no financing to fossil fuel. That will clean up our balance sheet. Maybe true, but for a bank with $3 trillion of balance sheet, there's no way our balance sheet will become net zero aligned when the world is not aligned. So the way we thought about it, and this is already, I started saying this, but this is no longer my view, it's MUFG's house view, which is, let's make sure that the real economy will transition and the real economy become net zero aligned and we become net zero aligned, not the other way around. Not just think about our balance sheet, greening and cleaning our balance sheet, and forget about the rest of the world or the real economy. We need to make sure that the whole system, entire ecosystem become net zero aligned so that we can also claim net zero, because that's the only way I think we're all become sustainable in terms of real economy and also financial system. So that's our underlying philosophy. I'll just say one more thing about client engagement. Everything that we do, or the strategy we are undertaking to pursue net zero, is client engagement. Why? Because of scope 3 relationship, you touched on to some extent. Our clients' emissions are our emissions because of scope 3 relationship. We cannot decarbonize unless our client decarbonize. You may think that as a risk factor, but I see that as an opportunity. Your emission is my emission. That means your decarbonization is my decarbonization. Your success is my success. So this is probably the first time your interests and our interests are aligned. So this is why engagement is very important. We want to understand your decarbonization strategy, and we want to support your decarbonization strategy. We're not just saying we'll finance anything, but we want to make sure that we respectfully challenge your transition plan and make sure that we are aligned in terms of the direction of travel, where we are heading. Let me stop there. I know we don't have much time, but happy to address any additional
I think
questions.
we'll do a quick round of questions. So, Mr. Sully, I mean, you in the past, you've been a very frequent issuer in the ESG bond space. Is this a space you intend to continue to issue going forward?
No, we have not been a very frequent issuer. In fact, in the green bond market, we have done this. See, what the issue is the pricing. You know, it's we're not getting the right kind of pricing. Because of that, our frequency of issue and when you look at the pricing and the added compliance cost, it doesn't really work out for us. So we have not really been very frequently. We have done about 3 issues, but at the ESG space, yes, we have, because we got a substantial ESG portfolio, a social portfolio that we have. So we have been there in a substantive manner. We have recently announced green deposit. I don't know whether this audience knows it. Reserve Bank of India came out with a green deposit in the finance framework sometime last year. And based on that, we have come out with a green deposit policy, and we have announced a green deposit, and we have put it on the site also. But let me tell you that the market is so price sensitive that, the green, we expect to get a certain discount, right? Because there's a compliance cost. So I think everyone wants a price, right? When you want to get into a green, you're looking for, let me get the best price. So that's what we are also looking for. When we are sourcing funds so that we can fund the Avadas of the world, the renewable powers of the world at a price that is acceptable, we're not getting that price. That's where I'm just taking the example of the green deposit. I put out on the public domain that I'm willing to take green deposits, but the green deposits are going to come with a slightly lower price than the normal deposits. Because so that there's a compliance cost, I will also pass on the discount. But let me tell you, today I have something like on the term deposits, the tenor deposits, I have something like 24 trillion deposits. And on the on-demand, I have under 18, 19. So about 42, 43 trillion deposits I have. The green deposit is just 28 million rupees. So there's no market here. I mean, when that has become an issue, so we have, what we are trying to do is, rather than issue green bonds or ESG, of course, yes, we are on it. We are now trying to tap the DFIs and the multilaterals as a way of getting, acceptable long-term funds at an acceptable pricing, so that we can pass on the concessions to the Avadas of the world. And we have been fairly successful in that. In fact, if you look at it, there are about 521 DFIs in the world with a lendable resource of $2.3 trillion. Now that's one big platform that we are trying to sort of, target. And like I said in my opening remarks, in the last 2-3 months itself, we have been able to get nearly $500 million. And these are coming up, these are resources that are available to me. For example, if I issue a green bond in the international market, what is the kind of pricing I have to offer? I'm getting these multilateral institutions and the DFIs to give me at almost 1% lower than that. If I'm getting a SOFR at 130, I'm getting at 30, 35. That price differential. And I'm getting it with the assurance that the differential would be passed on to my clients here. And that's an undertaking that I have given. And that's something that we are diligently doing it as well. So that's one big market that we are going to do, and that's something that we are going to use it to pry open. And in fact, if you look at it, we have been given certain concessions here. In some of the bilateral deals that we have done in the renewable space, etc., we have given a substantial concession based on back-to-back arrangements that we have. In fact, in a deal with Telangana Discom for giving rooftop solar there, we are given a pricing concession of as much as 3%, based on a back-to-back with the multilateral institutions. So we are passing on the entire concessions as we get to the clients. But in the green bonds, we're not getting that pricing advantage. And the compliance cost added is virtually negating the minor concession that we get. So we are not a very frequent issuer there. But like I said, the multilateral, the DFIs is something that we will target in a very, very focused manner, so that we keep the Avadas happy.
Thank you. Rajat, you mentioned that there's this issue that access to capital domestically is an issue. What are your thoughts about raising capital offshore, financing offshore? Do you think that's going to be equally challenging, more challenging?
So look, as far as capital is concerned, domestically or offshore, I'm thinking we don't see a challenge in terms of availability. The issue is in terms of, again, I'm coming to the bottom line, that what's the pricing at which you raise capital, right? Now, in terms of if you talk about especially the debt capital, right, for any sustainable energy projects, whether RE or, way forward on the hydrogen side, for example, ammonia side, for example, right, it's available either form of, external commercial borrowings or ECAs or maybe bonds, right? Again, most of the bonds which are issued by Indian companies are high yield bonds, right? And which basically means you're raising capital at a very high cost, right? A debt at a very high cost versus, what you can raise in domestic markets, right? So while the capital is available, question is again that what price you raise. And then it is typically, all these infrastructure projects are very long dated projects, whereas you raise typically a 3 to 5 year money in those high yield bonds, right? Very rarely 1 or 2 issues have happened for 10 years, right? So therefore, it also brings the volatility which is associated with the markets, financial markets, how financial markets behaving at the time you want to refinance or, refi those projects. So basically, in our experience so far, what we have done is we have stuck to the domestic markets because there we are able to get much better pricing versus international markets on the debt side of it, right? I'm talking about bonds per se, for example, if you look at high yield bond versus, any money raised in domestic markets, okay? And of course, you run a lesser risk of refi, for example, right? These are really long dated papers we are able to raise. Having said that, the other issues are ECBs and ECAs. I'm saying, again, you get the challenges with respect to the average tenure or maturity, how you can, refi and then use the capital for, the money for that. There's end use restrictions, right? Okay. And if the opportunity knocks, you want to pay it, prepay it, again, you're really locked in for a certain period of time, either under regulations or because of the high cost of unwinding those things. Okay, so that's where our view is that domestic, I'm saying institutions can do differently here. And some of the things which I talked about, like for example, I talked about making a RE as a separate, sector.
Yeah.
Even I'm saying, like you have priority sector lending, can you make, green financing obligations per se, for example, right, as a separate thing where banks or other lenders are encouraged to lend to this sector, right? Okay. They can be green banks, for example, globally, like if you look at in Australia, their green financing agency has lent almost like $37 billion last 10 years. We don't see that institutions in India, okay? And then some of the new energy initiatives, like for example, green hydrogen, ammonia, they are not classified as infrastructure. Like Sean mentioned about NAFED, right? So while NAFED or an IFCL, they're infrastructure financing institutions, till the time these sectors are classified as infrastructure, they cannot lend to these sectors. Okay, so some of those things can be done, which helps us, raising. Like Sally mentioned, in terms of, while SBI has passed on some benefit in some of the deals, but that amount is very less. I'm saying, like he said, that raising money from multilats, probably you can raise a multilats such KFW or, Proparco or something like that, and they pass on the benefits. EIB has its own challenges when they lend to the, institutions like SBI. They put so many conditions on the part of the borrower or developers to reconfigure their project. Yeah. Okay, the project which is already operational and running, all right. And now if a lender like SBI goes to EIB for raising finances for their own line of credits, which SBI wants to give us a benefit on, they put certain conditions on us to, change the configuration of the project, which makes it very difficult to do that. So even if the lines of credits are available, you can't really use it. So there are such challenges, which needs to, be handled.
So do you think, in terms of one of the ways of lowering the cost of raising financing for yourself, could be actually credit enhancement? Because as you mentioned, like the cost of raising money offshore for high yield rated issuers is quite substantial. And maybe a credit enhancement structure by some of these international agencies or even financial institutions could help.
So my view is that probably one is that domestic bond market, if it can be, really deepened with, right? Today, so if we talk about 85% of the bonds today are AA category or plus, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the institutions like mutual funds, the insurance companies, the provident fund, they only invest in AAA rated bonds or AA rated bonds. They can be encouraged to invest, low rated bonds. The reason being that any infrastructure project is very difficult to achieve a AA or AAA rating. These projects will achieve a AA rating only maybe 4 years, 5 years once they have become operational. Okay, so how do you fund the green projects? It means your dependence upon the domestic institutions only remains there then, So that's one issue which needs to be addressed. Can you allow institution, the investors in bonds to finance low-rated bonds, for example, right? Okay. Sure. Can you develop the public markets for bonds? Again, 98% of the bonds are, privately placed. Okay. A public bond market will help us with more price discovery. All right. Okay. That helps us. Typically, the other reason is that you have 3 to 5 years bonds. Nobody wants to, look at 10 years, 15 years bonds, right? Okay. Sure. Institutions like NAFED or IFCL, they're happy to, look at 15 years bonds, right? But then on a very bilateral case-to-case basis, So I think those are the areas which can really help, and therefore, the other thing is the compliance cost. The compliance cost in terms of, like today, for example, the bonds is supposed to be listed, right? By virtue of that, the issuer becomes a listed company. Okay, so those bonds are traded on the wholesale debt segment of the stock exchanges, right? There are hardly any trading in that, but by virtue of having your instrument listed, you are supposed to comply with all the listing norms which are listed. Equity player has to do it. Yeah. So it indirectly increases your cost of compliances, etc. So those are the things which we believe can really change the things.
Sure. Mr. Acharya, I think we have time for one last question, so I'll address it to you. As a group for access to capital markets, access to domestic financing, access to international financing, what do you think should be the approach for a diversified group like yourself in terms of deciding what should be the, what's your priority in terms of which forms of financing would you actually go for? And then how do you decide on which markets, when and how?
Yeah, before I answer that question, I think I have a quick reactions to Tomo-san's point. I completely in agreement that if world will be one country, then we need to put maximum efforts where the maximum result can come. So therefore, emerging market is the place where the maximum transition financing should come. I completely agree with you. But at the second point I want to make here, the transition pathways and transition financing, the way it looks or it is perceived in one region should not be the same in the other region. What I mean to say, when we develop the transition financing requirements and pathways, we need to consider that it has to be different. Obviously, in the emerging market, we need to leapfrog, and it should have been the more flows, the capital flow should happen to the emerging market, but unfortunately, it's not possibly happening. Coming to the questions, Gaurav, quickly, because it's time not there and I am not the right person, in fact, to answer. My finance people who are there, they will be able to answer your questions. But what we look at are the large conglomerate. Getting finances is not the issue. Issue is that if I am selecting a technology that can that can accelerate my ambitions and transitions, how do I manage those gap between how this project or activity can be financially viable versus what is the current cost going to that project? So I'm looking at, so in a sense, what I'm telling, the focus in addition to the transition financing, the focus need to be also on viability gap funding to make sure the technology which has not proven to be commercially viable and therefore its adoption by the business is not rapid. How we can make it rapid, therefore how we can accelerate. With that, I think let me stop here.
And that is the key question of transition. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
In Europe, we're talking about how we aggregate demand, how we generate demand, how we create long-term offtake agreements. If we start looking at things like auto manufacturers, think of Toyota. If Toyota were to put out a mandate that it wanted all its steel to be green by 2030, every steel manufacturer in Japan would be going super green fast because they consume so much. And you know what? The cost at the moment for Toyota to buy green steel is about 40% more per ton than ordinary steel, based on the Swedish experience. But the cost for a car is 1%, the extra cost for Toyota. So why wouldn't they do a green mandate? Well, that's one of the conversations underway. And this is how we generate. And the government can step in. Imagine the government gives Toyota a 1% tax credit or 2% tax credit to start offering aggregate demand. The likes of JSW will turn on a dime. That's what we have to do now. And that's the collaboration going forward. Before we finish, I want to quickly ask the audience for 3 quick questions to our crowd. So I'm urging you, I'm going to come back to you in a minute. You're going to get 30 seconds each. Put your hand up when you can. But
Sir, before they ask
order.
questions, I have just 2 follow-up points what you stated. I absolutely agree. But 2 things I always tell that if you have to accelerate, another 2 things are required. The mandated demand generation. So what is the mandate for the greener products? Of course, Anand talked about greenhousing and green hushing. But what is the mandate? We need to create a mandate for creating that optic. It's not about the demand of input material and demand of the cost of the input material translating not equally to the cost of the product that a customer uses, but also creating a demand. Because I sincerely believe that if you create a demand, believe me, industries like us will be able to supply you whatever you require.
Yep.
Right? That I can assure you. The second point, we need to create mechanism to penalize those who are not meeting those expected emissions level. I'm really
you want to stick as well?
Yes.
Whoa! You heard it here, everyone.
that will accelerate because we need to use both carrot and stick. Only one mechanism is not going to help.
Well, he's put the cat amongst the pigeons there. I just want to wrap up by asking the audience, anyone got a question of this incredible panel? We've got a few microphones. You've got to run, guys. You've got 30 seconds each, so it's quick and sharp. Far away, stand up, say who you are, and far away. Here first and back there.
Manikan from Radiance Renewables. A very interesting conversation on the integration of various businesses of JSW, cement, steel. You mentioned about using a lot more green energy for your steel making. And you talked about slag cement being manufactured from the slag. But the moment you transit your steel business from blast furnaces to electric arc furnaces, you will lose out on all the slag. Then how do you make your cement green? That was the question I want to ask you.
Always tough, but don't answer yet because I'm doing their round first. Back there, please, stand up.
Hi, I'm Shamik from ICICI Securities Primary Dealership. I had debt capital markets there. Just a left field question, given that domestic lenders have risk appetite but don't have unlimited pockets. Domestic debt markets have deep pockets but very low risk appetite. International lenders have also limited pockets. Could we instead have the government, instead of giving incentives, put a green tax on personal incomes and corporate incomes to fund climate finance?
Thank you. Who else? We had a couple more back there. Anyone? Any last questions? Okay. I can't see anyone.
Green
so
tax.
I'll answer the first question.
You're going to have to answer.
Yeah, because it's a direct question. No, thank you very much. That's a very intelligent and question. Look, we are looking at 2050 as our net zero for all our businesses, right? We are talking about the transitions before we become net zero and now. So in the interim, there is a growth of the slag availability. Therefore, the slag cement will be available for the cement. At the same time, cement also has a plan to achieve net zero, right? Because the electric arc furnace growth is not expected to soon because there is a limited supply of the scrap. The scrap availability has to increase. And in my view, I don't think that world can see end of blast furnace at least by the end of the century. There is various technical reasons.
We'll have a beer about this afterwards.
But that doesn't mean we will not achieve net zero. Because carbon capture and storage has to be an integral part. That's what we call unabated and abated blast furnaces. So blast furnace is going to be there because of various other reasons, because of the quality reason, because of the requirement of the products. So it is going to be there. Only thing is that proportion has to be changed. What you see in Europe, because of the availability scrap, you see more electric arc furnaces. That will happen in India possibly post-40s. So in between, there will be a growth and requirement of the slag to be utilized. That's what I was talking about. And no way I'm shying away to achieve net zero before 2050 because we have a plan for cement business also to achieve net zero in the same scale, right? So it's the transition. I'm talking about transition, not the end.
I want to direct that Shamik's question to actually Tomo. So Tomo, is there a precedent where governments actually put in place a green tax in APAC? Can you think of any country where this has happened to fund the transition to net zero instead of depending on private sector players and to kind of solve it for themselves?
So I think the question has to be how can we achieve orderly transition, right? I mean, stick or tax maybe is a strong tool. And of course, that will incentivize who may be able to achieve the threshold. Having said this, we need to make sure that the transition is orderly. We, as a bank, we're not in the business of picking winner and forget about losers. As I said earlier, this has to be entire ecosystem transition. We always talk about just transition, right? We always talk about not creating stranded assets. Stranded asset, maybe this is a financial problem or risk, and therefore we may be able to deal with it. However, we cannot create stranded people, stranded communities, stranded sector, right? How do you deal with all the sector and achieve orderly transition? That has to be the aim of the government, but we also agree because, as I said, our balance sheet is systemic. We can't just say, this sector is great, this sector maybe will not win, so forget it. But we have existing exposure, so we need to deal with all these sectors. So tax is a very powerful tool. At some point, I think we need a stick. However, if you apply that now, we may end up creating winner, but also creating loser, which is not what we want. So maybe at some point, until government says, okay, I think we're ready, we may not want to apply strong stick. At the moment, this is more about carrot. And at some point, I'm sure a stick will have to be implemented because you don't want to slow down the transition. I'm sure Sean will agree that you want to accelerate transition. But how do you do that? It's not just about stick, carrot and stick.
It's complicated, and more to the point, it's about a wide variety of enabling mechanisms, which may be a stick here and there, maybe a carrot here and there, and sometimes it's just knocking heads together. So to take that story or to go to the steel industry, government could bring those two together and say, we have a Japanese or a German or an Indian transition here. Let's get Mahindra together with JSW and say, what can we work out? Is there a deal we can work out? What do you need us to do in government to make the deal really work? This is doable. And this then becomes financially viable for SBI, or maybe if you MUFG, to finance the transition. If the three heads get together. It doesn't necessarily require subsidy or taxes, but we need to try and look at everything. So you're right to raise the point. There's just a lot of options. This is a cool panel, eh?
Yep. I couldn't agree more. Thank you.
We need to wrap up this session and move on to investors. Correct. But I'm asking these guys to sit in the front if they can, because the investors may have some questions, right?
And one photo.
Please.
You can all stand up and take a quick photo.
Oh, photo opportunity.
Shashank?
But while they're standing up here, give them all a clap. What a great panel, eh?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Hey, thanks, Rajat. Thanks, Tomo.
No, thank you.
Now, you've been hearing from corporates and companies. Now we want to switch gear and move to investors. Victoria Harling in the audience from 91 is going to join us on stage, and the other speakers are joining us online from various parts of the planet. Victoria is head of emerging market corporate debt.
Yes.
Hey, thank you for coming. For 91, which is a major investor globally in emerging markets especially, which is why her title is so important to us, based in London and South Africa.
Yes.
Online, we've got a few people joining us. I'm hoping that technology is going to work in a minute. But there's something special about this panel that I want to draw your attention to. Of our guest speakers, our 4 guest speakers, 3 are women. This is not unusual in sustainable investment. The green movement, the responsible investor movement, when it comes to the buy side, is being dominated, is being driven, is being managed by women more than men. So that panel we just saw, yes, that's right. Give them a clap for that. because they seem to understand sustainability better than some of us crazy old men folk. So that panel we just saw, lined up with men, is counterbalanced by a panel dominated by women. Of course, for you men that were on the panel before, you have to kowtow to the women. Let's be clear about that, right? Because now the world is changing. Now capital understands that sustainable returns are dependent on a sustainable planet. And that is a movement being led by women, which I'm very proud to have been able to talk to and be part of and so on. We're going to hear about that. So I just wanted to put that on the table. That's okay, Victoria. Okay, now I'm just hoping our friends are coming online in a minute. We're having two panels because there's so many people online. Joining us online are Shilpa Singhal, who's the portfolio manager from Schroders, who's joining us from Singapore. We have Abhishek Kumar, State Street Global Advisors, who's a managing director, head of global strategies of emerging markets and Asia Pacific, fixed income better, and a good friend of mine. We talk every 6 weeks or so. Esther Law, very good friend of mine, senior investment manager, emerging market debt and responsible investment lead at Amundi, one of the world's biggest fund managers, although a little behind State Street Global. I won't have to just put it on the table. Sorry, we want Amundi to grow bigger through being green, etc. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, Victoria, 91 is a particular interesting moment because they've been really driving this discussion about what transition finance in emerging markets is. We've been collaborating on a few projects going forward, and there's a whole story there which I'm going to try and tease out as we go forward. Thank you for joining us. Let me start the conversation by saying, tell us a little about Victoria, the transition story, and what it means for your appetite. You've been in the audience listening to the folks at the previous panel.
Yes.
So, of course, they're all dying to hear what an major global investor thinks. What's your appetite for transition and what are you looking for? Give us a sense.
Yeah, I think if we take a step back, some of the themes that have been playing out over the last 8 years or so has been internationally clients' focus on climate, carbon, and transition. And I'm sure a lot of the ladies on the VC will resonate with the frustrations that we have, whereby the measure of carbon is a blunt tool for understanding how we save the planet. And instead, we can take a much more sophisticated approach to thinking about transition, which is helping companies invest, financing them, that often takes 7 to 10 years plus in order to actually shift the needle and transition the economy away from fossil fuels and carbon-intensive sectors. So with that in mind, we took a relatively pragmatic approach to try and focus investments on companies that have ambitions to get to net zero and reduce carbon in the atmosphere. So we calculate carbon reduced, and we invest in companies that are actually providing that enablement for economies to shift. So it's a slightly different approach to decarbonising portfolios, which simply means that you shift your sectors rather than actually help heavy industry decarbonise.
So engaging, this is like the JSW story.
Yes.
We'll connect you afterwards.
We're very connected, and actually I would say that we traditionally have a lot of our portfolios in India. It's one of the most exciting countries that's actually really investing and doing things. We think there's a lot more that you can do. I have a lot of comments around financing, etc., and I have been to try and originate because you guys are no longer issuing in dollars. So yes, we would more issuance from you.
But you mentioned speed of transition.
Yes.
So you're looking for 10 years, not 40 years to transition.
Correct. So actually, looking at the 2070, it's very important, and particularly for attracting low cost of capital, very clear stories. We can only really deploy our capital. We have a lot of international investors who really want to focus their money on true transition stories, but we have to be clear that the companies are committed to it. So articulation of strategy is absolutely key, with clear information and reporting how your transition is going. That's very important.
Esther, if I can go to you. You and I have been talking about transition and about sovereign appetite too for a long time. Amundi was the organisation that set up the first big green bond fund of the IFC a few years ago, so has been a leader in this particular space. Tell us a bit about where you are with your appetite for green and, in particular, emerging markets like India.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me here, Sean. This is really a privilege to be sharing. And the previous panel, as you said, it was really extraordinary. In terms of, Indian green bond market from our seat, clearly there's this demand here from us. And having been involved in a few blended finance projects, we do still a good pipelines coming through, not just for India, but generally speaking for emerging markets. For us, we have also, through this IFC Green Bond Fund, we have also done some technical assistance facility, where I think some of the Indian financial companies have also taken part to try to, green the space, increase the quality green bond issuance. So I think we are continue with this energy, with this effort. What I would also say is, I cannot agree with you more very, very quickly. I think the message from the previous panel is still, we know this is not a perfect space yet, and there's a lot of work to be done. But I think a lot of initiatives in terms of, let's say improving the quality of data, improving the definition, especially led by the CBI initiatives, have been really helpful. And finally, a collaboration, a collaborative approach is very, very important here. Thanks.
Appetite there. Abhishek, State Street Global Advisors is one of the world's largest fund managers. I can't remember how many trillion, but 7 or 9 trillion you're at Abhishek now, but whatever. This is bigger than most countries. You've had quite a story of continuing engagement of the green space, climate space, the last few years from your clients and in the work you're doing. Tell us a bit about that, and tell us a bit about what Indian corporates need to hear from you.
Yeah. Thank you, Sean, and thank you everyone for having me. It's an amazing panel, and the speakers before had very interesting thoughts. So obviously State Street has a fairly big book of business. The assets that we manage is quite extensive, and the interest from clients in terms of green and sustainability-linked bonds is also increasing a lot. In fact, along with CBI, State Street is also part of Sustainable Markets Initiative, where our CEO is the head. And I saw a paper where there was an estimate from IEA, where they estimated that 30 trillion of money is needed for the 5 most polluting sectors, which contribute 95% of carbon emission, which are power, building, mobility, industry, and agriculture. And that money needs to come and be borrowed in the international markets, because banks will not be able to finance all of it. So there is, I think the earlier speakers talked about the demand. And once the supply comes in, trust me, the demand will be there. In terms of what we see now, India is obviously a big bond market, but international investors have not been there as much. So the demand that we need is missing. In fact, India is in corporate space is pretty small versus even regional peers like you have Hong Kong or Brazil, Mexico, Korea. India has a very small issuance size in corporates. And when it comes to issuance in domestic currency bonds, obviously that's not there. And which was a sort of one of the reasons why India is not there in international bond market. So there's no demand there. But that is changing.
But Abhishek, except for the Indian sovereign, which you were very keen on finding out more about, didn't get a chance, right? Just to put that on the table, Ministry of Finance. So this could begin, this could get going now. If we saw INR issuance, does that mean you're interested in talking?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, if you look at any history of any country, the sovereign is first the one to issue in domestic currency, and the international investors follow that money. And then it opens up opportunity for the domestic corporates. In fact, domestic corporates do not issue that much in INR actually at all. They pretty much issue in dollar, which, as we know, isn't it's not a friendly currency for domestics. So the sovereign issuance in INR and the demand from foreign investors is an amazing opportunity for corporates to find funding, not just in dollars, but also in INR. It will open up doors which erstwhile was not there. The reason being, like for the likes of us who invest in emerging market debt, it was not easy to access domestic bond markets. But with the India's inclusion, we are setting up a lot of processes to make that happen. Now, if we have the processes to buy INR IGBs, there's no reason why that same process can't be used to buy a domestic corporate. So the opportunities are tremendous. The demand is going to come, and the corporates, I don't think, should have a problem finding demand if they can issue the bonds in manner which is interesting for bondholders internationally, which includes issuing in size. I think someone mentioned about liquidity. If for the likes of us who manage index funds, liquidity is bread and butter. We cannot manage daily flow funds without liquidity. There are many ways liquidity can be created, which shouldn't be that difficult. Actually, it's pretty easy. And then even high yield issuances are not that difficult for international investors to buy if it meets the credential, if it has a certification, and so on. So all in all, just a little bit of effort will go a long way in creating sufficient demand from international investors.
Wow, that is an important message for our audience here to know. Opportunity, Prabodha.
I'd like to now shift to Shilpa. So Shilpa, Schroders unveiled a sustainable sovereign bond fund last year. And can you tell us something about that? And also, what's your outlook on India, and where do you see the opportunity in terms of in this space we're talking about? And I have a follow-on question after that, but I'll wait for you to start.
Yeah, thanks, Gaurav, and thanks for inviting me. This is indeed an exceptional forum to be sharing some of the thoughts around sustainability, and excellent views shared so far. Maybe just a bit of a background on Schroders to give you a sense of some of the funds that we've launched in this space, and a lot more exciting things to come in the future, which will be more focused towards emerging markets and Asia. Schroders fully integrates ESG across its managed assets and is a founding member of the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative. And we've also set science-based targets to align 100% of our assets to 1.5 degrees by 2040. What that essentially means is that all our AUM is in some way or the other looking at ESG metrics. Doesn't matter whether it's Article 6, 8, 9, or any other regulation on the planet that you can think of. What that also means is we have an inherent demand for looking at sustainability in its various aspects, including decarbonization. So the Sustainable Sovereign Bond Fund is one of the attempts in that regard, where we are trying to identify the sustainability pathways of various sovereigns globally, and trying to channel our funds towards those sovereigns. Needless to say, the targets vary by different regions. And the Schroders framework is not a one-size-fits-all. So we are certainly not assuming that India pathway should be the same as that of Germany, which was something which came up in the previous comment. We fully recognize that all of Asia actually contributes to nearly 60% of global emissions. So there is no decarbonization without decarbonization of Asia. And within that, India stands out in terms of higher physical and transition risk. Therefore, there is no escaping funding India as part of our decarbonization effort. For that, we are looking at raising funds which are more targeted towards Asia decarbonization as well, and looking at channeling the funds of our clients towards that effort. In terms of some of the opportunities that we see for India, frankly, the world is your oyster. I think sectors throughout the renewable energy value chain can access bond markets. You can look at social sectors such as access to healthcare, digital inclusion, reduced inequality of income, gender, and we can also finance companies which are transitioning from more higher carbon towards lower carbon. So utilities, automakers moving towards EVs, steel, cement, chemical makers, and we heard from some of them earlier as well. And additionally, I also want to highlight banks and FIs. We recognize how important banks are as a funding channel within the region and specifically in India. We see them as partners in enabling the transition of a country like India. And the only way to do this is to identify the financed emissions at the bank level and to aid in that transition process. So really the opportunity is immense. And I agree with some of my fellow investors earlier that the demand is there. It's there for the taking. It's really just a meeting of needs on both sides. And there's no reason why we can't fund this.
Well, thanks for a very, very comprehensive answer. So reacting to some of the comments in the earlier panel, issuers are often focused on getting a greenium, in terms of offsetting the cost of compliance, the entire process of accessing the international capital markets, cost of reporting, etc. What is your view on the same? I mean, they seem to want some give and take between what they're willing to part with and what they expect something in return from investors to kind of be slightly more kind when it comes to looking at issuances. And this is something I'll also ask you, Victoria, but Shilpa, why don't you go first?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's a fair ask, right? I mean, of course, there are higher costs of disclosure, of compliance. So I fully get it. But I would encourage issuers to sort of think about greenium over a time spectrum rather than looking at it from a point of issuance or deal by deal point of view. So if you're already a very green issuer or a very credible, sustainable issuer, have plenty of disclosure out there, the market knows your message, you can demand a greenium at issuance, and chances are you will get it. But for a more developing segment, such as the Indian sustainable space, I think greenium can happen over time as you build credibility and transparency. And that comes with disclosure. I get it that we are asking you to incur some of this cost upfront, but I think that the benefits that you can have in terms of financing costs will not just reflect in terms of greenium in any of your sustainable issuances that you do, but I think it has the ability to reprice your conventional curve over time. Because over time, I don't think there should be a big difference between cost of financing a green bond from a very credible sustainable issuer or a conventional bond. Either you are a sustainable issuer or you're not. And that just needs a little bit of time to develop in terms of confidence. And the second thing I want to highlight about greenium and reporting costs is to also look at the trade-off between not incurring this cost now and taking on additional risks down the road to your business. You could have stranded asset risks. You could have additional costs from additional regulatory reporting risks. These are all costs you will incur, which you're saving by incurring some of those compliance costs at the moment. It's become a bit of a chicken and egg problem right now because we don't have sufficient disclosure, not enough issuance out of India or Asian issuers in the space, we are not able to bring a sufficiently credible story to our end clients that this is a space that needs dedicated funding. So as disclosure improves, we are able to raise funds dedicated to the emerging market, to the India sustainable strategy, which is targeted towards the India pathway. And then that greenium starts to flow around. So the pool of money is there. It's really a bit of matching of minds, I think.
Victoria, you were mentioning that you would really like to see more issuances in the dollar space from India. So how would you react? Because this is a common refrain even for dollar issuers. Adding to what Shilpa said.
So my first thought when the topic came up on the extra cost of compliance, first of all, that came up with reference to the green deposits and lending on green loans. So as a bank, even though the banks will displace my financing potentially after I've made this comment, but if you are a bank, actually providing loans and taking deposits and paying more for those deposits potentially is a win-win, because it's not just about helping companies to transition, it's about avoiding the cost to the economy of what climate change is going to do. Now, if you're a bank, that means increasing NPLs. You know, the priority sector lending have floods in rural areas, you are going to have a net pickup in NPLs that is going to cost you money. So you have to think much more holistically about growth.
Victoria, we might need to get you to move to this one.
Yeah, happily.
Figure out how to put it on.
It's on and off. Thank you. So you have to think holistically about growth, about your entire book, and then factor those costs in. The second thing I'd say is that's also true for industry, because if you have a pickup in NPLs, credit lending is going to shrink and your economy is not going to grow as quickly, which means your profits are not going to be there. So have a little bit of longer term strategic thinking so that you can deploy your capital now and save for the future. That would be my first thing. The second thing is that, you know, we had a panel of incredibly influential companies. If you cannot convince the government to change the taxation on deposits and bonds to help change your financing, then this is why you're not getting cheaper financing rates, okay? Because the end person net of tax is paying a lot of money to lend you money. And I've spent the whole week talking to investors that are very keen to open up AIFs, and that's the next channel of lending. But actually your cheapest cost of finance will be in liquid space. And if you can get the mutual fund market with investors like us that will come into the domestic market, particularly given the inclusion of the government bonds in international indices, then I think you can actually lower your cost of finance. So there's a lot of things to work on structurally, but just having a little bit of foresight about what your 5-7 year plan looks like and how you help the economy sustain growth is probably the key thing that I would like to leave you with.
Thank you. Esther, at Amundi, you've also been, I understand, really embracing this issue of the transition, how we support the transition. Can you tell us a bit more where your thinking has gone? I'm conscious of your AIIB partnership, for example, which is all about the transition of infrastructure in Asia. Give us some colour.
Yeah, and maybe before that, I just want to react to the greenium question, if I may. I think, you know, so far the history for emerging markets, again in general, to measure greenium is still relatively short. And one must also bear in mind that when thinking about greenium, is some analysis which we did before on for the IFC Green Bond Report, is that it also depends when you issue the bond, right? If you issue, like, let's say in January when the market is a bit more positive, then you naturally have a better premium from the issuer perspective versus, let's say, versus when the market was weaker. So that's something to bear in mind. But I do agree with Shipper that over time, and also Victoria, over time, this should pay off, and this should have a better statistical reflection of the quality of the bond. And it also depends on who is holding the these potential green bonds. So at Amundi, for example, and going back to your question, we have the AIIB fund, we have the IFC fund, and these funds are committed to buy straightly very well screened labeled bonds. So I think this is something we also bear in mind, that there is, like Shipper said, a separate port, and i.e. additional demand. If a certain standard and criteria is met, then we can deploy more capital on that front. In terms of again going back to the AIP and also the IFC, we have continued to see a lot of requests and pipeline from different form and shape and different region in that space in terms of really mobilizing capital into this area. I think because last year was a bit of a due to the interest rate cycle, overall the fixed income, I think that the fixed income demand was not as good as we would like. Nonetheless, we still see some green bond issuance increase over there. So I think the trend is still moving to the transition path, and in the right direction. But I think hopefully, like now that we have a bit more stability on the Fed's policy outlook on the fixed income side, we can have a bit more deployment or issuance in the green bond fund. Thanks.
If I could do something on greenium, and I'll see if Abhishek agrees, because he's a heavyweight and I'm just an amateur here. But as far as we can see, we publish 6 monthly reports on greeniums, that in the secondary market, in liquid currencies, we see significant greenium, significant as in AAA, it's 5 basis points, to higher ratings. So it's consistent once trading's there. And why is this? Why the hell is this happening? Well, I remember it was Jason Morto at Nomura who did the first research, which showed whenever there's a downturn in the market, green bonds seem to hold their value. They are a superior value retention tool in an industry dominated by defensive investors. So that's actually what's driving the greenium. Then, in March of 2020, when bond markets froze for 2 weeks, the beginning of the pandemic, US Treasury markets froze, I got a phone call from a big investor in New York who said, "Did you know I'm still getting bids on green bonds?" Their view is this is actually superior liquidity to a US Treasury. Whoa, there is no more glittering prize for a defensive fixed income investor than a bond which has value retention and superior liquidity characteristics. And that is driving a modest, we think, primary price benefit. So in the Japanese bond, for example, the sovereign, Japan sovereign spreads are very tight, as Tom will tell you afterwards over a cup of coffee. They got a first in time in the market, 0.7% differential, 7 basis points, so 0.7 of a basis point, I should say, difference in pricing. Tiny, but still real on an $11 billion size bond. That's a fair amount of money. The most AAA issuers in Europe are getting a 2 basis points benefit. So this is not 100 basis points, not 200 basis points. It's not going to solve Rajat's problems as he talked about earlier, but it's material if you're a big issuer. And we only see that continuing in liquid currencies. Sometimes we see it in illiquid currencies. Before the war in Ukraine, I was on a panel with the deputy mayor of Moscow, who said to me that their inaugural $700 million bond in rubles and low domestic currency to finance the metro in Moscow got a 20 basis points benefit in rubles. And that happens in Chile, that happens in Colombia, that happens in Brazil. So this is a consistent pattern, but I want to stress, I don't think it's fair to say it's sentiment. I think it's fair to say, you need to link it to superior secondary market characteristics. I can't comment about Moscow, that was crazy. but in other circumstances. So that's a background to pricing issues going forward. Abhishek, have I spoken out of turn? He knows more about this than I do. Abhishek,
Yeah, yeah, I mean, green is a hotly debated topic, and you brought Japan at the very appropriate time. So in the pre-market for Japanese government bond, the greenium expected was -9. When they issued, the greenium came at -1 basis points. And as of today, the bond is trading flat versus its comparable bond. So investors or issuers should not just think about greenium, and as Sean rightly pointed about value retention. If I have to choose between two bonds, a brown bond and a green bond, almost certainly brown bond will be the first one I would sell. So the important message is not about the greenium, because Colombia is a good case study. They issued the 10-year green bonds, and that came at a considerable premium. The bond became very difficult to get hold of in secondary, and the greenium escalated to about 30 basis points. They saw the benefit, they brought in and tapped the bond, and the greenium quickly subsided. Thailand, on the other side, the 10-year bond that they have trades flat versus, or the ESG bond trades flat versus the curve. Japan has a $150 billion issuance plan. Greenium is not the concern. It's important that they get the funding. This is one type of bond which will get the funding that is so desperately needed. When we talk about 30 trillion of issuance, I think it's important to look at 30 trillion instead of 10 basis points. So the size will matter. Size of issuance will be definitely important criteria for issuers. You could get size done. The ratings you could also get even if you have a lower rating. The interesting thing is, yes, greenium is still there, because in dollar bonds, where the Indian corporates issue, the green bonds are only 1.6% of the dollar IG corporate bond universe. It's so small that buyers like us have no choice but to pay a premium or a greenium to buy those bonds. But Europe, on the other hand, has about 9.5% of green bonds issuances in the Euro IG space. And therefore, you would naturally expect a smaller greenium. But that shouldn't be a concern. It should be about how can I fund the massive transition that is about to come to us. And that's the message. I think I agree with Sean completely.
I think we have time for one last round of questions. So,
could I just add one thing on that? I run money for some of the biggest asset owners in the world. One of them is a global insurer. They have a business here. They classify the emissions from green bonds at 10% versus a normal bond. So you take your company's emission and you discount it by 90%. Okay, that is testament to how some asset owners are thinking about helping the transition. So this comes back to why there's extra demand for green bonds and why it's really important that we continue to back this asset class.
Well, thank you for that. So Shilpa, in terms of what are the trends you're seeing in terms of reporting, compliance, asks from investors, as well as any other disclosures which investors are looking for, and how has that changed over the last 2 or 3 years in this space?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So maybe I can divide that in two parts. One is when we are talking about label bonds, say green bonds specifically, right? There are some asks that many of us are looking at, because we heard other panelists also talk about credible green bonds, right? So what makes a green bond credible? What we at Schroders are looking at is targeted, measurable, material ESG impact. So when you're bringing a specific label bond, you need to have a measurable impact, and it should be material. We are aiming for transparency. So that's a key criteria we're looking at. So clear disclosure, both pre and post issuance. There should be targeted use of proceeds. Process of project selection and evaluation should be clearly laid out and shared with investors, management of proceeds, external reviews, and impact indicators. I must admit, Indian bond issuers are getting quite good at pre-issuance disclosure, but I think there's still a bit of work to be done on the post-issuance reporting side. So there should be an intended impact reporting from the get-go when you bring a deal to the market, and start disclosing that. It really improves the credibility of the green bond that you're issuing. The second thing we are looking for is additionality. So you should be looking to fund new projects. It can be, there can be a 2 or 3 year look back, but it shouldn't be something too old. It shouldn't be a one and done. I did one green bond and I left the market. So there should be some sort of a plan to fund your overall strategy towards transition. There should be some steps taken to reduce adverse impacts as well. And especially if there are any past controversies that the market is aware about, if you can provide some transparency around that, any efforts to mitigate that, those are always very helpful, because we are not here to judge issuers on controversies in the past or things that went wrong. The idea is to try and see if there are mitigating factors and how the company is moving forward. Moving on to the second aspect, which is looking at the overall issuer profile. Here, we also have increased the asks from issuers. So we are not just looking at net zero targets at this stage. By now, issuers should start thinking about timeline and pathways to transition and set interim targets. Here, again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. In Schroders, we are not expecting an Indian utility to transition at the same rate as a German utility, for example. So it should be in line with the issuer's regional as well as sectoral transition pathway. Of course, SBTI is something which is encouraged. We understand that the disclosure requirements and the costs there can be relatively high upfront, but SBTI awareness leading to eventual SBTI adoption is quite strongly encouraged. Over and above all of this, we really appreciate bondholder engagement. So we would love to hear from issuers. Disclosure sometimes can be lost. A lot of information can be lost. So we are very happy to engage, discuss the things that we are looking at, and help and assist in any way to get the message across.
Thank you for that. And Esther, would you like to share your views on the same? I think we'll just go around asking this because this is quite important. So your thoughts in terms of how the disclosure requirements, reporting requirements have changed over the last 2-3 years, and what are the expectations and trends going forward in this space in terms of impact assessment, etc.?
Yes, so from our side, in the European space, obviously the regulation has only become stricter and tighter. So for all we do have a green bond team to evaluate the green bond framework to make sure it's ICMA compliant. That's the minimum, and for that it means that we have to have very clear disclosure on the user proceeds side. Back to Shilpa's point, for some of the other more demanding mandates, we also have to fulfill the MDB green bond standard. So I think on that front we are also trying to make the landscape better. And for those who have heard about the ASCO project, which is assessing sovereign climate associated opportunities and risks, it's a group of investor-led framework project leveraging on the academic work to try to standardize in the sovereign space, at least to have a way of thinking about how to measure the 3 pillars in the climate assessment for various sovereigns, including India, and that should help us to I would say standardize what questions we can ask to the issuers, and again with a huge intention of not penalizing, but just a matter of getting together collaborative engagement, collaborative approach to improve the standards, so we can be responsible to our investors in making sure that the funds are really going to the user process, the correct user process.
We need to wrap up in a minute. I want to go to the audience, if I may, and just ask for a few short questions. Excuse me walking out the room and to go. I'd like to say it's because I think butterflies come back to interview Robbie Singh on stage, which would make anyone nervous, right? But in fact, I've got 4 daughters, and sometimes you've got to just make sure something's okay. Luckily it is. We'll talk about that in a minute, Robbie. To the audience, Any questions of our audience or any reflections? You're going to get 30 seconds each, but I'm keen to get a few comments before you go. And I would also like to ask our previous panellists to think of a question. On the stage, put your hand up, please, and a microphone will come to you. And I'm going to call out Tomo Ishikawa in a minute if he doesn't put his hands up. At the back there, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for such an insightful session. This is Rohit Goyal from MUFG Bank. My question is to Victoria. I want to understand that while making an investing decision, regulations and policies plays an important role. Particularly in emerging market, different countries have different regulations and policies. How do you see the support coming from government and policymakers as well as regulators that impacts your investing decision, as well as the support from different market? How is India's support different from other markets?
Yeah, I think...
Let me just do a round, if I may, Victoria, and then we'll come back. Any other questions, please, down here? Stand up so they can see you, and then also there'll be one down here in the front in a minute. I need another microphone down here, please. Please, go ahead.
Hi, my question is overall within the sustainable bond umbrella, how do climate bonds fit in, and is this better or does this narrow the construct?
I didn't quite understand that. How do climate bonds fit into?
Yeah, so basically an issuer has the option of raising a sustainable bond or a climate bond, right? So sustainable bond, so climate bond would be a subset of a sustainable bond. In terms of liquidity, in terms of pricing, how does this play out?
Oh, that's a fun one. Okay. Sir.
I have a question.
I should hope so.
So, as a bank, our approach would be not just think about the tip of the iceberg, but entire iceberg to transition. But how would you approach this entire iceberg transitioning when I understand, green bond, I assume it would be more higher in the context of iceberg, but how can you expand your risk appetite so that you can invest in broader ecosystem as opposed to just those companies who's capable of issuing green bonds?
That's a good one.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, tough question. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else want to put their hand up before we finish up? Okay. Good. Victoria, kick us off.
Well, I think the whole panel are incredibly esteemed, actually, and involved in a lot of discussions with international asset owners and governments on how to mobilize capital into EM. And that's where a lot of the conversations have actually happened, particularly around climate change. And those conversations are still happening. Now, the earlier panel, the comments around sourcing money from DFIs is the natural conversation that is happening today, but it simply won't be big enough to mobilize enough capital into EM. You need to do that through liquid bond markets first and foremost. So, what I've seen from SEBI is this incredibly, positive sort of momentum on trying to get the liquid bond market going, and it takes time. So, my comments on taxation, there are more things that can be done, but that's really, part of the policy that I think will shift the needle in the long run is actually trying to create liquid markets. We see it from other emerging markets as well, but India is absolutely leading the charge on that. And so I applaud what SEBI are doing, but there's still a lot more that needs to be done to help get down that credit curve. I don't know if any of the other panelists have comments.
Please, would anyone like to have a shot at the responses? And Abhishek, I'm interested from your perspective as well as, well, all three of you really, this sustainability, the different theme, I'm going to call it the different flavors of gelato. They're all bonds with purpose, but is there a differential appetite for the different labels that are floating around?
I'll handle the third question, which is the interesting one, which is about the iceberg, the whole iceberg, not just the tip of the iceberg. This is an interesting opportunity to highlight about what the Sustainable Markets Initiative is doing and the Asset Manager Task Force. This is exactly that problem where asset managers like bigger asset managers, they look at the portfolio, they exclude the high emitting companies and then see, oh, my portfolio has a lower carbon emission, but that doesn't solve the transition problem. So this task force is going to allocate or divide all the assets and give a view to the portfolio managers to divide them into transitioning companies which are transitioning, committed to transition enablers. So they may not be, they are needed to transition. And the interim phase out and then aiming to transition, and also one sector on the stranded assets. So when you look at a portfolio, you have a better view of what you're going to do. It's not just about buying the green bond and the sustainable bonds, but thinking about the whole problem, not just the tip of the iceberg. This will come out, but this problem is not, it hasn't been ignored, it's being looked at. And then coming to the green versus sustainable bonds, green bonds are obviously the most sought after bonds, and because they have been there for a long time, the climate bonds. But sustainability linked bonds are also becoming interesting. They're a bit difficult to price because you have KPIs linked to them. So you have coupons going up and down. So they are not easy. Green bonds have the benefit of being there for a long time, have a nice framework and greenium, which is a term which most understand. So things will change. This is not just about green bonds, but social, sustainability linked bonds, and all of them will have a part to play at different points in time as we progress towards 2050.
Yeah, just to echo Abhishek, indeed, I think the difficulty is, again, going back to defining, because ultimately, whatever, us, the portfolio managers, need to do is to able to measure, portfolio construct, and report. If we are not able to even have a good definition of, like you said, let's say social bond or gender bond, then it will make it more, it's quite difficult. If there's no standard, then it's very hard to make a call whether this is meeting the requirement. So in that sense, I think, green bond, use of proceeds, green bonds is still by far I think the most developed, if I may put it like that. SLB is catching up, but the thing is just linking the SDG to the KP, to the SLB potential KPIs in itself is not the easiest thing to do at the moment. But, I believe, and also CBI as well, right now you have the sustainability linked bonds principles. So it's catching up, but with a big lag. Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe I can chip in, completely echoing the thoughts from previous speakers. But indeed, I think at Schroders, we are not looking at exclusion. And therefore, we are definitely not looking at just investing in the tip of the iceberg. As a champion for sustainability, specifically in Asia, I simply cannot construct a portfolio if I just look at the tip of the iceberg or just label bonds within the region. We had heard earlier how small that universe is. So we have to focus on transition. And frankly, that's the only way we can reduce 60% of global emissions. So there is a broader framework. Yes, enablers, leaders is one way of looking at it. But the narrative has moved away from looking at the best-in-class names, those which are already very clean and green, to looking at the wider space and looking at transition leaders, for example. And definitely in terms of demand for various types of bond as disclosures improve, the demand is there for different class of bonds. Green bonds, naturally, given their disclosure level is higher, it's easier to measure the impact, tends to have greater demand. On SLBs, I tend to take a slightly different view. I mean, one thing is being able to price. The other thing is there's a bit of a mismatch between our demand requirement in terms of maturity and tenor versus when those targets can be achieved. You can almost call it as the degree of ambitiousness of some of those targets. So there's a bit of a mismatch there. Maybe there's a different way to work that solution out a little bit. And one of the reasons why it hasn't probably taken off in Asia specifically. But I think for the other label bonds, there is definitely a lot of room to grow.
We need to wrap up our panel. I'm going to ask for a parting reflection from each of you or rather a message to the Indian community? What would you what do you want to leave them with to go? But just before, if I can say something about the sustainability, the Climate Bonds position is that we support all of these. However, the Brazilian experience, when they planned to do a social bond, a sovereign, they went to investors and they got a bit of pushback saying, yeah, we like it, but we prefer green more. They changed their format to green, and then they got a much higher subscription level than they expected. So both good, but for the moment, the dominant one is green. However, the direction of travel for us is to put adequate skeleton of definitions and credibility and boundaries across all of these, transition finance, SLBs, where we're on record as saying half the SLBs in the market are crap because they've cherry-picked KPIs, but there's about half that are reasonably good. If we can get credibility in all these segments, they will all grow. From our perspective, we want everything to be about climate. Social should reflect climate resilience, social resilience. We need to link it all together because that's the dominant issue. And for an issuer, we want them to run one program. We want SBI to run a single program which includes social, sustainability, mitigation, all under a broad climate mitigation and resilience framework as a way forward, rather than silos. So that's kind of our take on it. I'll leave that for a drink afterwards. We need to wrap up. Just the final advice or word to the Indian community. Maybe Victoria, you kick us off.
I would say that the stars are aligned for India. You lead the world with Aadhaar, UPI, your digitalization is incredible. You're an enormous economy that is a heavy emitting economy. You have the opportunity to lead the world and show the world what transition looks like. Please help us do it. We will back you.
Well, nice. We'll go Esther Abhishek Shilpa. Esther.
Hi, I would approach from the angle of obviously recent market developments have put India, especially in the fixed income space, at a very high and important spot. So echoing Victoria's comments, I think it's not just on the renewable front, especially in the corporate space, but I think for the local sovereign space in particular, if they can continue, improve on let's say the access, just the market's access to the IGBs, and also continue improvement on various reporting, that will also be a huge addition to the green space. Thank you.
Yeah, from my side, this year is going to be an industry for at least for emerging market bondholders. So the corporate should make the most of it, and this time is possibly the best ever that has come in a decade.
Shilpa.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, indeed. I would, my advice, I think, to Indian issuers would be, indeed, I think this is the time for India. It's an opportunity. Let's not lose it. Let's take a slightly more medium-term approach to funding plans, financing costs. People are waiting on the sidelines to fund India's growth, India's transition. We are here to help, enable, collaborate. It's really an opportunity which is there for the taking, and for the company and the government in India to capitalize on.
Great finish. Thank you. Give them all a clap, please. Thank you, Victoria. Thanks, Gaurav.
Yeah, thanks.
A quick photo opportunity. Please give us a second.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Gaurav. Thanks, Abhishek, Shilpa, and Esther, for joining us today. It's been great, and for taking a bit time out of your Friday. Please.
Thank you.
Everyone, now I would like to invite to the stage my special guest, Robbie Singh, who's the Group CFO of Adani. Yeah, I always do have butterflies when I'm about to talk to Robbie, but we've been talking for a long time now. Because after all, it's a massive project that they're involved in. Let's just tease it. Let's just see what's going on there. Robbie, please join me on stage if that's okay. How are you, sir?
How are you?
How are your kids?
I'm good.
My kids are giving me a bit of a headache at the moment. have a seat. Robbie, as you know, is the long-time Group CFO of Adani and has been helping to steer a business, a group, I think exemplifies the term transition. I mean, when we started talking, which is a long time ago now, a slightly difficult conversation we had, you were sitting at the top of an organisation that was, I'm going to say, very brown, but moving green. Since then, you've grown a pipeline of investments, which is green, green, green. And I will say, one thing I know about Robbie is that from day one, it's been one of his ambitions, personal ambitions, to figure out how to develop a green pipeline, to grow investments in renewable and other things around it. So, you know, if you look at Adani Green now, it is extraordinary, the growth of that pipeline and that investment. I mean, of course, I still want to do more. I want Prabowo to do more as well. I want everyone to do more, but that's my job, right? You've got this massive ship that you're part of steering. You have already made some enormous changes around transition. I'm interested to hear where you are now, what the pipeline looks like to a certain degree, but also where you think you are on this journey from being an organisation of a certain kind 10 years ago to a very different organisation going forward.
Thank you. And I wasn't avoiding your phone calls. I was actually traveling, so I couldn't answer the phone. I couldn't get hold of you before this. I think when we reviewed all of this really closely in around 2015, 2016, three things were crystal clear to us. Aside from policy and strategy, if you depended upon government payments, then everything is just talk. Nothing will happen. And it's not just for India, it's for Europe also. Now today everything is shut, renewable. Nobody is building anything, complaining about supply chain costs and this, that, other. Ørsted is pulling out, Equinor is pulling out, BP is pulling out, everybody is pulling out of projects. So the second was that the core to get this thing work, get this thing to get going, was to get the risk capital in place. There's no bank capital, there's no bond capital, there's nothing available if there's no risk capital. So you have to figure out a way to get risk capital into this. And this combination of the first two meant that until or unless you could actually make this economically viable, without tax, without any special treatment, without anything of that nature, then there is no scope of anything happening. We could be sitting here 20 years from now. For example, today people say, oh, you know, we have a policy for 1.5 degrees centigrade. Now, this is such a ludicrous concept from scientific point of view that where does this 1.5 come from? The 1.5 come from is that very subtly the political establishment in Europe has chosen to start from 1910. So 1.5 hasn't yet been achieved. But if we go to 1885 and say, I want to start from 1885, then we are already 1.7 into the increase in temperature. So what does this 1.5 even mean? Who are you trying to fool? And this idea that this fiction can continue is the single biggest stumbling block to doing anything worthwhile. Because this is just like, this is an insult to basic, our shared humanity, that we can have this kind of nonsense. So when we look at this, and when we say, okay, we have to do this, and we have this discussion, when climate bond, didn't want to rate our bonds, yeah, give this the credit. But did it stop us? We went ahead. We got cheap capital. We didn't need any rating from anybody. It, anyways, is the only investment grade issuer out of India. Doesn't matter who puts a stamp on it. We don't need a certificate from somebody sitting in Europe to say, what are you doing? The basic is this. We think that energy transition is once in a generation opportunity of wealth creation.
Right.
So we participate. So is disclosure a cost? No. Is transparency a cost? No. So because it is economically viable at the basic level. So today this light is on in Mumbai. Last time when we met, 16% of this power was coming from renewable. 1 year later, 39% of this power is coming from renewables.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So there is not a single mega city on the planet with 40% power coming from renewables. But they all have signed up all pledges and achieved nothing. And then we hear lectures. Oh, follow this, follow this. Why? So first thing is, my thing is first time to London, please, you can lecture us. First make London 40% renewable, like we've done to Mumbai. And we didn't need a government support. We didn't need anything. We don't need any battery. We didn't make any excuses. We didn't anything. We legally committed and we've done it. We legally committed. Our government is not legally committed to India's 2070 target. Adani legally committed to. Our company, Adani Energy Solutions, legally committed to. In 2026, 31st of March 2026, 60% of this power will be renewable. Nothing will change it. And we will not make an excuse like Germany did. Oh, sorry, Russian gas is gone, start the coal-fired power stations. No. Is climate change and the risk of climate susceptible to the fact that your gas costs have gone up? So this kind of talk is, quite frankly, debilitating to the whole process, and that's why it's not happening. So last time we met, I promised you on the green hydrogen.
Yep.
So I'll give you the last.
In fact, you mentioned a big green hydrogen.
Yeah, correct. So, and we went through all this malicious, politicized drama last year. Despite that, 4.5 gigawatt of cell module line has been near-shored into India. 1.5 gigawatt of wind turbine, which nobody supported us. Gamesa, GE, Siemens, everybody said, no, why should we build a 5 megawatt machine for you? So we said, okay, fine, we'll build it ourselves. So that is now up and running. 142 of them are operating. India's first wafer's been produced. India's first specialized glass factory, 600 TPD, largest, is up and running. 3 electrolyzers are doing their curve testing. One with wind turbine, one with solar, one with solar-wind hybrid. Pre-planning on 40 gigawatt of renewable power, geotech studies, special concrete, special steel, special coating, all of that is underway. In fact, our team is today in China because there are 2 of us who can build that concrete. One is China, one is us in Adani. Today, as we speak, 700 megawatt of the 30 gigawatt world's largest any type of power project is up and running. And before this year is end, it would be 2.2 gigawatt of the 30 gigawatt completed. So nobody needs anything. It makes money, people invest. Sure. If somebody says, I'm going to invest for the plan, quite frankly, please stop lying publicly. Okay, let's just be real. Would you invest without making profit because some flood will come in 10 years' time? No. The reality is, nothing will happen without making money. Doesn't matter what the fund managers say. And that's why what has occurred, Sean, is that if you look at who's setting the rules, who's making disclosure statements, who's doing TCFD studies? Who's doing SBTI? I don't like naming them. I say Schroeder said or XYZ say, and we are part of this and we're going to disclose this. You know, nobody who's taking risk capital position is on that table. Who are you making the rules for? You will not invest if we don't put the first risk capital in, and we are not on that table. Is any company sitting here who came here, is that they are on the table to design disclosures? Who is designing these things? Would you invest? I know 91 very well. I know their team very well. I have friends there. Would they give me $1 if I don't put the risk capital on table? Which company would they give $1 to? Why are the companies who are here before, corporates, why are they not on the table to design these things? And so that's the picture, is that whole thing is profitable. Last quarter, Adani Green achieved 1 billion of EBITDA. Incidentally, Ørsted, which is Europe's largest company, only makes 1.4 billion from utility sales. 5.6 billion they make from tax from government. Taxpayer of Europe is paying them. Adani Green's in June, we'll make more money than them from utility sales, green electron sales.
I don't want to go too much into the returns and different roles, except to say, clearly, this transition that we have only works if it's a financial opportunity. It doesn't work because we're going to save the planet, because we're all individuals, someone else do the bad stuff and so on. So clearly it's got to be financially viable.
Yeah.
Now, if it's financially viable because the Japanese government provides R&D funding for IHI, I'm for it. Great, go for it. Whatever works and kicks along. But for individual enterprises, of course, it's got to be viable. So I'm not quite so hardline on you about the nature of support. Whatever works, in my view. However, you have done this thing, grown this business, which is quite an achievement. You've got these astounding plans, notably the hydrogen stuff, which when we talked last year, you said two things to me. One thing you said, which I need to check with you, is you said no new capex in coal was where you are, one. And then two, you said you had some, if I remember correctly, $70 billion planned in the green hydrogen and associated space. I don't know if the capex plans are still along those lines. How do you do that? Because that's just it's like swallowing an elephant for anyone into the pipeline. No. Tell us a bit of a sense of how it's going to work.
It's very simple, you know. We don't have the luxury.
Sorry, you don't?
We don't have the luxury that Europe has or America have. You know, we have actual issues that we need to resolve. We have education access issues, we have health issues, we have various countries. They are being compounded day by day due to climate risks, due to adaptation risks, due to the cost going into those matters. We ourselves have tens of billions of dollars of assets which are sitting on coastline, say in Adani ports. We have 2 airports here now. The second one will be ready December this year in Mumbai, and we're around the country. We have many assets which are exposed to this risk, and close to, 500,000 families depend on those assets. So, to answer your question, right, 15 billion of the 100 billion we said last year, we've already spent. Yeah, this last year.
Okay.
We will spend another $85 billion. When I say, and I'm giving this number carefully, because we don't need 1 rupee of this number from anybody. Not debt, not equity. This is our own internally generated cash, and we only announce what we can fund ourselves without needing anybody.
Wow.
So $85 billion we'll spend in CapEx over the next 9 years. It is locked in, so I'll give you the numbers. So for example, 30 billion of this will be spent by Adani Green Energy to go from current approximately 9 gigawatt to 45 gigawatt by 2030. And same amount will be spent by Adani New Industries to build out the 1 million ton hydrogen facility, which will go to 3 million tons by 2033-35. About $10 billion will go into our transport and logistics fleet. We want 60% of the power that goes into cement, which is a hard to abate sector, to come from renewables, solar and wind. And we want our port and transport and logistics asset to move to 100% renewable power only in their operations. So scope 1 and 2 eliminated. And about $4 or $5 billion will go into our other businesses. So that's the total of $85 billion. In fact, in new capital in coal, as I mentioned last time, we haven't invested new capital into coal since 2017. That was the last time we put our own money, new money. As the business they invest their own. But last year onwards, we actually extracted the money out of capital, out of our traditional investment, which is anyways now less than 5% of the group's total EBITDA. And that has gone into our other assets. Now, these are all specific step-by-step process. For example, if we have to build out the transition space or new energy space, then certain things become imperative. Okay, the risk that we have to take. Now, there's a lot of talk of green hydrogen, we'll do this, we'll do that. Well, great, it's nice to listen to. But we are exposed to, and which we've done, $4.43 billion to be precise, is going to go into ensure that the input cost of the green hydrogen ecosystem can be actually done at the rate that will make the thing work. Okay, now that $4.43 billion, doesn't matter what anybody pontificates about their great idea about setting up funds for green hydrogen and green this and green that, not $1 they will invest.
Say that again?
Not $1 they will invest in that part. Because they will say, but this, it's manufacturing risk, what will happen if it doesn't work, and this, that. All of these things come up, which means that there is actually no investor who's investing solely for the purpose of climate risk.
Right.
Everybody is investing to make money, and by shouting climate from the rooftop, there's a way to make money. And my message to people is, we've had this circus enough for the last 20 years. There are enough genuine risks. As responsible citizens, let's focus on the genuine risks and deliver on the genuine change that is required on the ground. And I think enough time has gone that it is now becoming disrespectful that we keep talking about these things, and somebody says, I'm going to be 10 basis points more and 20 basis points less. You know what? It can be 100 basis points less. If the panel who was here before, corporate panel was here before, if they choose not to invest their first 1 cent of risk capital, even if I go beg, nothing will be available. Even if I say I'll pay 300 basis points more for green, they will say no. First put your money. So what we have to do is to see who's actually investing. So when the UN Secretary General said that $1 trillion is required, I said at that time in Davos, I said to my boss, I said, Gautam, you stand up and say, you will do the first 100 billion. And we made that commitment. We will invest that first, we'll invest the 10%. If 10 companies in the world do that, rather than talk, but actually do that in green space, then we'll have the $1 trillion of investment, equity. Okay, I can borrow $1 trillion against it, I can borrow $2 trillion against it. So we'll have $3 trillion of investment ourselves. So it's all of this is happening on the ground. But this highly politicized charge environment, Sean.
Yes.
Yeah, which is, you and I know the difficulty you faced when we had to rate. Yeah? It is okay, because we are still friends, and because I understand your limitation. Okay, Okay. But if that did not mean that we could stop.
No, no.
We still had to invest. So we invested also. Same thing is there today, where SBTI, they are themselves not transparent. If you write a letter, I challenge anybody, write an email. It goes to no one. It goes to a computer. Nobody knows what they do. There's no transparency. Nobody knows their board members. Nobody knows anything. TCFD, same. Nobody's transparent. CDP, nobody knows. DGSI, nobody knows. How are they evaluating these things? So it is okay. We are obliged to be transparent. We are transparent because we are public companies. So we will be transparent and we will disclose everything, not because of climate, because it's required by law and we have responsibility to our investors.
Yep.
But these organizations who have no responsibility to anybody, they actually should have somebody monitor them and say, you be transparent before you ask somebody else to be transparent. So TCFD should have a transparent process. Now, to give you an example, TCFD rated Adani Energy Solution as the #1 in transparency. Mysteriously, SBTI decided that they are not compliant. So we said, what do you mean? Then finally we found out that our friends from Market Forces, Anthropocene and BankTrack wrote them letters and they changed. So we had to threaten a lawsuit in New York. And then they changed their mind. I mean, what is this nonsense? And who they took out from SBTI? Adani Green Energy, world's largest developer of pure play solar and wind assets. Adani Energy Solution, which has delivered Mumbai more green power than any other mega city anybody else has delivered, including governments. So India is way ahead. If PM Modi has said 2070, I can assure you, I know of him very well. We will get there before Europe gets there, to their so-called net zero.
Yeah, I think that's right. Go India!
Yeah. Because it's a genuine, for us, we'd have to do it for our people, you know. There's no choice. And so it's not because somebody will give us a certificate and take, wow, you are great. No. For us, it's a paradigm to do this for our people so that they have a future that took us, and I'm sorry to say this, but in this finance forum, but it took us 1,000 years of war to win our independence. 200 million dead. Now you and I also live in Australia. That is 1 Bali per day for 1,000 years. Our event. So we owe it to the future generation to do this. So we will do this. We will deliver this. And we've now found a way to deliver this in a profitable manner. Our Adani Green is massively profitable. Adani Energy Solution will just touch $1 billion EBITDA within the next 9 months. Adani New Industry, our green hydrogen business, is today already nearly at $400 million EBITDA, cash profit after tax. By September, we'll supply 60% renewable power to our cement business. By 2025, actually we'll achieve it before, but legal, we are committed by 2025, Adani Ports, 100% of its power will come from renewables of its operations. And we are not saying 2030, 2035 and 2040, and then battery will happen and this will happen, or 2050 target. It's, I think one of the panelists mentioned, I think Victoria only mentioned, it's a time-bound way to do things. So we are committed in a time-bound way.
So you're a group in transition, and it's a very cool story, the whole thing. I'm intrigued by how you're going to do it, but you've covered that a bit. Next year, but not next year, I'm foreshadowing this, Gaurav. Next year, I'd quite like to talk to you more about how we deal with the existing legacy portfolio. because you give me the headline I need today. But, you know, at one point, and this is a conversation we've had before, is where do we go with our fleet of
That
existing
we have
ships?
found a solution to that with
You found a solution?
with our friends in Japan.
Ammonia?
Yes.
Oh, there you go. Tomo.
So we work very closely with one of our close industrial partners in Japan.
IHI? Oh, he's not allowed to tell me yet, probably,
Yeah.
but anyway.
And I will give them a shout out, Jira. They're an exceptional company. And Japanese know this stuff, you know, they were onto this in 1970s, and they were the pioneers of solar technology and all. And so thank you to the researchers in Japan to have done this. But our tests have been successful. We can co-fire the supercritical and ultracritical turbines with ammonia, which will bring them to the emission standards slightly below a closed cycle gas turbine. Yeah.
Just to be clear, everyone, this is creating green hydrogen from renewables, creating ammonia, and using ammonia as co-firing. It's working there. In the Japanese circumstances, it's a bit iffy because Japan's a rich country, and according to the IA, it's got to shut down its coal a little bit faster than we can do. But in India, where there's a longer glide path, it looks eminently feasible and possible as a technology. The cost structure, I don't know about. That's what Robbie's got to try and sort out.
The cost structure, obviously, you know, we want to make money. You know, it's just like I'm not a saint or the last person to be moralizing anybody. So it makes money. That's why. So that's why it took some time to figure out. It is hugely profitable, and it will make the returns. The other aspect of this is the second aspect of this is that. And that requires us to, which Adani Energy Solution is doing. We will roll out about 40 million or 4 crore in Indian terms, smart meters.
Yep.
And special with the HVDC lines and connecting the grid in a certain way to allow what we call grid banking. So what that does is, which is why Mumbai works. So there's no batteries here in Mumbai city, and we are not storing renewable power anywhere. So what we do is we rolled out 500,000 smart meters here. And the combination of smart meters, HVDC lines, and fully digitalizing the whole grid, it allows us to grid bank. So now, when you grid bank, what it does is that we can configure. It requires, we took help from Google to design how to run this, and Intel to build the edge boxes, and also it required a lot of technical work. And once we did that, what it allows us to do is to inject solar power and renewable power, which is intermittent, into a major city like Mumbai, which is heavy user for us. It's a commercial capital for India, up to 60 to 70% without batteries. And what we do is we use the thermal power as a battery. So you throttle it down, throttle it down, throttle it down, throttle it down to technical minimum. Okay. So the second aspect is that you first, with ammonia, the actual emissions go down, and then you don't use that much of it. So on the total basis, your emission intensity, which the PM has said to achieve 45 by 2030, we will achieve that for sure. At least we will, Adani will, achieve that for sure. And so that will mean that the emission intensity for the same power we are going, it also goes down at the same time, and we are injecting more power. So that's the second. Third part of this is the concept that a year or so ago when we met in the COVID year in Sydney, where we discussed about the circular economy. So because we can, we on one side we have cement, on the other side we have CO2 and sludge, and now we have ammonia. So the good thing is, the chemistry is that with power, we can actually not let the CO2 go into air, pick it up from the chimney, and then ammonia and CO2 gives us urea. And actually we will land it at cheaper price than what India imports today, because the current urea chain is all hydrocarbon chain.
Because I wanted to ask you with these other businesses, the cement business in particular.
Yeah. So now on the cement side, the sludge goes, so your excavation part of limestone reduces and the waste goes in. Okay, so to that extent, you're not dumping sludge anymore. Okay, so that's the other aspect of waste management that goes directly in. So there are many layers to this. So then is the tech, fourth element of this is tech. So when you build 30 gigawatt, which we are doing, okay, now if you say I'm going to use water to clean the 30 gigawatt, then that becomes an issue. So robotic cleaning and the cleaning designed in the manner that the tech cleaning itself is powered by solar. So the robotic arm that cleans is itself has a panel on top of it. It is itself is solar powered, so it can keep going. And so I'm pleased to inform that like last year we were almost there, but this year we are. Every single site which is 200 megawatt or higher is net water positive. We actually save more water than we use, and we give it back to the aquifers, clean water.
Okay, interesting.
So there are a number of layers to this.
I've just got to ask you a last question about resilience.
Yes.
You know, you've got a very big logistic infrastructure business, some which is transporting coal, which will need to repurpose in due course, but we'll get there. In your ports business, to what extent have you been able to integrate so far an understanding of resilience in the context of rising sea level, storms, and so on? Where's that at in the business?
So that is, the resilience of this is the fact that we ourselves are infra investors. So fundamentally, we are investing for 20, 30 years. So one of the risks we have is, we have investors today, for example, say 3 years ago, who have given us 30-year capital. So they are expecting that whatever we have will run in 2047.
Absolutely.
And these are bondholders, by the way. So now rather than say there's a separate box to tick, Sean, so what we have is that this is a embedded decision into investment decision. Okay, you calculate and plan for this risk within your fundamental investment decision itself, not as an externality to look at. So what you need for resilience, how you need to protect, what are the likely outcomes, what could happen to, say, a storm surge in a port like Mundra or any other port. So this becomes part of what goes into the design today. So it means that you are designing assets today that are addressing that risk. Right. And this is a challenge for us when we talk to, say, equity community, equity analyst community, because by definition that means that some capex we are spending today will only earn return in 2045 or 2040 or 2050. So, for example, analysts say, well, what are you going to do next quarter? But so that's a challenge we face, because if you look at technical cash return, then the ROCE goes down in technical terms, because this is an IRR which will occur over a period of time. So what we are saying what we started to discuss with our equity analysts is that, listen, there's one return on capital which you are deploying on how much cash we are making. The second is the IRR element. There's the investment that will make a return over a period of time. So I think Victor only mentioned here, that you have to take some level of strategic view in this, which is either 10-year view or a 15-year view or 20, it doesn't matter. For us, it's basically, we take 27-year view, because that covers 99.96% of the value. So you go, okay, so and good thing there is that actually in the analytic community, there are people who go, we understand this, and they give you the value of the resilience. And we've seen that in our stock prices, despite all the noise last year, a port is at the lifetime highest share price, because people have just reduced the risk premium to the asset. And that's benefited the overall cost of capital massively, way more than what we could get cheap by labeling it green or brown or whatever the issue is. But the overall risk reduction, due to the point that you raised, is benefited into the total cost of capital, and it has seen that the share price has gone up from about, when we started this journey, around 300 rupees a share to now just above 1300. So it is 4 times more in value today than when we started on the journey. So the journey is massively profitable. Mm-hmm. And because we we invest to make money, so we will keep investing. Whether somebody labels it green or not label it green, I quite frankly don't care.
An organisation, a group in transition, had a rocky road at different times, but nevertheless grown exponentially, grown hugely, and so on. A past word, you've got an audience here who are interested in transition, who are interested in green finance. Advice?
See, 2 years ago, I got asked on a dinner table, what do you think of, by a very similarly large group, their founder, we were in London. I can only say with folded hands, my job is to think about Adani. I am not in a position to advise other people.
Fair enough.
Okay, I might sound, I'm hugely proud of what we do, but I'm not an arrogant person. I have no advice for other people.
All right, then I've got to ask you another question.
Yes, please.
Which is, as you know, we count Adani green bonds in our global tracking of green bonds.
Yes.
What can I tell my team? He can't answer me, I don't think, but I'm going to give it a shot. Yeah. What can I tell my team about green issuance this year? Will you be tapping bond markets again? What's it looking like?
Yeah, no, we will. I think we are, Anupam, my colleague is here, he looks after corporate finance from group point of view. I think they have we'll across green, across energy solutions, we'll have close to $3 billion worth of issuance, but we retired about $2.5 billion of that as well. So net will only increase by $500 million this year. But from renewable space, we will issue close to $10 to $50 billion worth of paper over the next 7 years. Similarly, about the same number from the green hydrogen, and about $5 to $6 billion from the energy solutions businesses. So in the hard, deep green space, we will issue close to, we will retire about 18 billion and we'll issue about 35. So we'll net issue about 18 billion of new paper, out of which Adani Green is deep green, so it comes with green certificate fully. That's the only thing it does, solar and wind assets. Same thing with Adani Energy Solutions now. So majority of this will be green paper because 100% of the companies cannot do any other business other than this business. So we will be a large issuer of this, and from investor sets, we got massive support. We think I'm not too fussed about whether it's 10 basis points cheaper or 20 basis points cheaper in the debt product or equity cost. The bigger thing is that what we have to demonstrate to the market is the total cost of risk-adjusted capital over the duration, 25 years or 30 years. If that can reduce and we can convince the total overall capital ourselves for our investment decision and our co-investors who invest with us equity, and if we can reduce that risk premium, the duration benefit is close to 40% of the value of your asset, which means that the 10-20 basis points of debt cost doesn't matter in the picture, because you are covered for the 25-year or 30-year period in duration risk. So the bigger thing is to remain engaged. The bigger thing is for us is to remain profitable without requiring government support. Otherwise, we'll end up like Europe, where nothing will happen. Continue to work on the fact that this is required technology. So this is the underlying risk to all of this is that the tech is changing. And so what we have to remain on top of is to, in India, and we tell ourselves, I tell our leadership team as well, me and my chairman, that some level of capital we have to get used to in India to put into R&D. Because it is now an important element. Part of this game is science. And therefore, you cannot simply rely on somebody else to do the science all the time for all the things. I think like with Japan and our partners in Japan, our partners in Germany, partners in Italy, we share a lot of knowledge. We have a research lab in Germany, we have a research lab in Australia, in Melbourne with CSIRO, we have a research lab here, and globally we are coordinated. But it means that we had to take the decision to allocate capital to research and open up a lab in Melbourne, open up a lab in Germany, open up a lab here, and then get the people from around the world to be involved in this, to solve the underlying engineering, underlying science also. I think if there's any message, or I won't call it advice, is that we have to get that mindset of R&D a little bit, because now we are in this space where evolving science is a risk to us, and therefore that risk has to be addressed. And so we need to invest in that risk.
Last year, you mentioned a target price for hydrogen of, you thought would come in at $1 or under $1, just a kilo. Is that still what you're thinking?
Yeah, we'll actually, so it gets divided into two parts now, a bit more granular information now we have. We will produce, cash cost of hydrogen will produce between 25 cents to 30 cents a kg, equivalent to other extraction industry.
Right.
Now, if we want to sell it at, say, approximately a 14% rate of return, we can sell it at $1. If we want to sell it at, say, the same price as what India imports LNG at, then we can sell it at about $1.96 a kg, which is parity to the LNG price in India. Of course, then we make a lot more money. So hopefully we'll sell it at LNG price.
Now, that's a story I'm going to be taking to John Kerry's office, because they're struggling with $3 a kilo in the US at the moment, and Biden's moonshot is $1 a kilo. So subsidies been built in, as you say. Hey, it's been a pleasure speaking with you again.
Thank you.
I look forward to these conversations.
No, absolutely.
Because this is a company in transition. Now, as I said, I will reserve the right to figure out how I can push them faster, because speed is everything at the moment. You've heard the comments about climate change before. We've got to really change fast, but we only get our corporations to change, our banks to change, if we can make this financially viable and profitable. And our challenge as policymakers, as think tanks, as NGOs, is to construct the future which will attract the money, attract the corporates in the right direction, that will also create a future for our children. The story of what's happening under that umbrella, frankly, gives me hope. And frankly, the scientists don't have much hope at the moment, so this is a scarce commodity. But it does give me hope, because it is happening. It's extraordinary what's happening. It's extraordinary, these changes, isn't it?
I'll give there's a lot of doom and gloom. So we invest for the future. So I can say this, and I can do this, because we can test this when we are back in Australia as well. Any measure of human progress that you would care to list today, you put on a piece of paper. We will be better off in 2050 than we are today. We will be better off in 2070 than we are today. And I'm happy for this audience to do it. And MUFG can collect the list if somebody has any measure that you choose: water quality, lifestyle, average age, average healthy age, any measure that people want to care to write. We will be better off in 2050 or 2070 or 2100. And if we are not better off, I will do this when I go back. I'm willing to do this. I will deposit and I will provide evidence to MUFG. I will put my own money. I will put $10 million deposit in a trust account on the 4th of April this year. And if I'm wrong, wherever at that point in time I might not be alive, whoever there is can take that money and give it to the charity of their choice. But I will put that $10 million of my own money on 4th of April.
You got to say, knows how to do a show, doesn't he? That's very impressive. We have a privilege in this room. There is something we can do to deliver the transition, to make sure we create a future for our children. It's something that I happen to know has motivated Robbie for many years, whilst he's been navigating through the world that he's in, and I know motivates so many people in this room. It's a responsibility with that privilege, a responsibility to act. In the face of the freight train coming down the tracks, we know what we've got to do. We kind of know how to do it now. We're hearing a story of how it's happening here. We just have to do it, I'm going to say, fast. Speed is of the essence now. A few short years to see a massive change in the global economy, then we will be able to tell our children when they retire, we made a real difference and we helped create a world they can live in. Good luck. See you again next year when we celebrate the next success for this extraordinary journey that we're all on. Thank you for being here today. Thank you, MUFG, for being a partnership, and thank you, Robbie, for the conversation.
Thank you.
How are you, mate? We've got to stand for the photographs. Okay, shake hands again, come on. Thank you. And now we have some refreshments outside. We hope you'll be able to join us for a while to have a drink or something to eat and to talk about how to create this future. Go to it, please.